Ajá. Bueno, mira, señora, ay señorita, nadie sabía lo que iba a pasar. Solamente fuiste y me dejaste solito en la eternidad. Señora, ay señorita, yo sé que ahora estás lejos de mí y siempre estoy pensando lo que estás haciendo. Y si te sientes más feliz, y si te sientes más feliz, oye, y espero yo que no te sientas sola y que tu vida está llena de felicidad, porque deseo que nadie tenga que sentirse ahora mismo como yo, atrapado en la oscuridad, solito en la eternidad, solito en la eternidad, oye. Trompeta. Saxofón con Cristian. Que no te sientas sola y que tu vida está llena de felicidad, porque deseo que nadie tenga que sentirse ahora mismo como yo, atrapado en la oscuridad y solito en la eternidad. Ay señora, vuélvete acá, vuélvete. Ay señora, ya se fue. Oye, muéstrame tu tierra, mami. Vamos juntos, vaya.
What the hell? What happened to the music? You guys hear me? Am I here? Oh, you can hear me. That's weird. Oh no, it's not even playing. Oh. Why? Why though? Why? Is it me? The day the music died. Wait, why is this happening? Please don't tell me that it's just not letting me use...
Morning in case...
Okay, no, that's working. What the fudge? Only I didn't say fudge. Okay. Alright, I think it's working now. That is so weird. Let me just play a little bit of from a different browser to see if this like is a computer issue.
Thank you, Mr. Castor. On behalf of Laney Brewer and myself, we do have some preliminary remarks that we would like to make. Mr. Smith.
What? All right, so maybe this website's just fucked. Maybe just the website. Then I guess I just have to go into the fucking stream because I don't know what to do. I guess I just have to stop. But I wanted to have music for a little longer. Okay. I guess we're doing this live. Please tell me this is working. All right, so that's working. Okay, welcome everybody. Sorry about that. Really screwed everything up there. You guys can hear me though. That's the most important part. Okay. So listen, here are some housekeeping preliminaries. First, schedule stuff. So tomorrow at 9:30, we'll be talking to Counterfarts about his takes regarding my takes on the good shooting. That's number one. Tomorrow, 9:30 in the morning, bright and early. So you can catch that on my stream or on his like Valuetainment, whatever, Valor Media Network. Or maybe even his regular channel. He might do that on Thursdays, not sure. Then, at 1 p.m., and I'll probably keep going, so I probably won't stop the stream, but at 1 we'll be talking to Richard Hanania about Venezuela and about ICE and related matters. If you guys remember, Hanania is like a conservative who's come out against Trump. And he has some interesting takes on the Renee Good shooting as well as other stuff. But he does support the Venezuela strike. Other housekeeping this Sunday at 3 o'clock Eastern PM. We'll be talking with the Vanguard. The Vanguard from the Vanguard show. They are more far left commentators who I'm sure many of my audience are familiar with, given the scandal on Lib and Learn that occurred when we first had them on some weeks ago. I actually had a conversation with them before their appearance on Lib and Learn, but no one seems to remember that conversation. But we'll be talking to them again on Sunday, probably some consistent themes on ICE and Trump, but also talking about the state of the left in America. Okay, so that's the agenda. There are some other housekeeping items. Let me think. Well, other sort of collabs that are in the pipeline that we'll talk about as they come up, but that's, I guess, what I have to announce for now. XQC's mods, or him himself, timed me out because I saw that he was streaming about the Renee Good stuff and just saying stupid shit. Someone told me, and they put me into a chat with XQC, that perhaps when he's not as tilted, he'll talk to me. I'm doubtful of it, but I am in a group chat with him right now. So thank you to that person, Prosecco. Appreciate your trying to facilitate that conversation. I think it would be useful for him to listen to reason, but you know, I don't have high hopes about the conversation happening, or indeed him being swayed by reason. So just putting that out there. Did you cuddle with Drew Pavlou? Not exactly, no. Not exactly. But we did take a selfie, which I will release at some point. He sent me the selfie. He also went down the golden escalator at Trump Tower, I guess. Which I'm going to be honest, when I saw that on Twitter, I chuckled. I had a nice little chuckle. How are you guys doing? Everyone chill? How's everyone's day been? Are you having a wonderful Wednesday? Wednesday, my guys? We are going to, in a moment, talk with someone who I believe is more conservative. Goes by mostly Peaceful P. I think I met him at Word War Debate, and I told him I would talk to him about some stuff. Let me just make sure this is true. Touch on January 6th, Renee Good, socialism, third-party politics. I'm sure it'll be a super civil debate. Yeah, so I think that'll be the first thing we do. We might need to wait for the SCOTUS stuff until after that conversation. I also want to get into some Epstein stuff because it's a super interesting update regarding Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie and a legal case, which I think has gone under the radar a little bit. Lib and Learn is going to happen on Monday. We actually have a really cool guest that we think we're going to run with. We just need to confirm with some stuff, but I think it'll be a very cool guest that we have this Monday or next Monday. So that'll be cool. So just keep a heads up for that announcement. Thank you so much for becoming a member. What up, Tomato? Also, see if there's other stuff. Yeah, a couple other collabs that potentially are in the offering. So before we're just gonna let a couple more people come into our chats before we bring in mostly Peaceful P. And I'm just gonna message him real quick to make sure. Are you standing by? If so, good to go in 5. But I did want to touch real quick on this leaked memo that just came out today. There's some whistleblowers apparently, and it relates to something I talked about with Crystal and Kyle earlier, which you can find in our discussion that I released on Monday from our conversation last week. So just let me confirm with mostly Peaceful P. And then we'll talk real quick about the leaked memo for about 5 minutes, and then we'll bring in mostly Peaceful P to talk Jan 6, to talk Renee Good, socialism, third-party politics. And just to shoot the shit, I guess. This is someone I believe who is more conservative, more MAGA-aligned, possibly supports Trump, I believe from our conversation, but he'll be able to define himself better than I am doing justice right now. Hola, lindo. What up, momentum? So, yeah. I think we're going to confirm. Okay, I'll just get started. So, the conversation that Kyle and Crystal and I had, at one point, he asked me about whether administrative warrants, 40 consecutive streams for Tomato. That's great. She's a day one. So, with Crystal and Kyle, there was a moment where Kyle asked me about administrative warrants and whether or not they're valid to be applied. And I don't think I really heard his question correctly. So I started just talking about administrative warrants in general being enforceable and why it's like politically problematic from the perspective of like, well, if it's the same executive agency that's not really having a good inquiry into probable cause, for example, well, that can be a bit concerning from a structural perspective and from a potential bias perspective. But then he kind of like focused in a little bit with his question to say like, can ICE with an arrest warrant enter into the home of an individual? And I said, I didn't remember. I needed to like go check my research, and I would come back to him on that. And what's going on is I was confusing. There's case law on administrative warrants in different contexts from like the 60s and 70s, which allows for them in certain situations. Like think about an administrative warrant, or I should say an administrative search, not necessarily a warrant, administrative search to go like home to home to see compliance with like the building code and things like that. Well, do you need to have a warrant for that? And so there's like specific kinds of case law for administrative searches that the court somewhat resolved in the 60s and 70s that I was like confusing my brain. And I didn't remember exactly what the issues were regarding administrative warrants to be served in a home outside of those contexts. And I'm like, wait, maybe they're allowed. Let me look into that. And so that's what I said on the stream. And then I was like, oh, wait, no, these are arrest warrants, right? An arrest warrant doesn't mean you're allowed to get into the home. And there's standing case law for that, that an arrest warrant doesn't mean you're able to search a home to go get someone through the warrant, that they're separate warrants. In order to get the warrant for the search to get into the house and do the arrest, you need to get that specifically. And so I should have answered, yes, of course, you're correct, Kyle. Instead of saying, I need to like go look into it more, I should have known that. So heads up, my bad. Yes, as currently is the law, the I-200s, the administrative arrest warrants, which ICE executes on individuals, they don't give permission to enter into the home, okay? They're just to arrest, and that's why they're goading people out of it, all right? But I think that my hesitancy may have caused the universe to upend itself, because there's at least this grainy little first page of a memo given to all ICE personnel from the acting director of ICE, Todd Lyons, authorizing Form I-205. So not an I-200, but an I-205. The I-200s are the arrest warrants. And so I should have just answered right away, but now we have a policy seemingly sent from May 2025. So this is before now, that says, on January 20th, Trump issued the Protecting America Against Invasion executive order, directing DHS to ensure the successful enforcement of final orders of removal. And essential to the removal of those aliens, subject to the final orders of removal, is the ability to locate and arrest them. To this end, certain supervisory immigration officers with both ERO, right, this is the enforcement and removal segment of ICE, and HSI, these are like the investigatory part of DHS, are authorized to issue an administrative warrant, Form I-205, for the arrest of an alien with a final order of removal. Although DHS has not historically relied on administrative warrants alone to arrest aliens subject to final orders of removal in their place of residence, the DHS Office of the General Counsel has recently determined that the U.S. Constitution, the INA, and the immigration regulations do not prohibit relying on administrative warrants for this purpose. Accordingly, in light of the legal determination, ICE may arrest and detain aliens subject to final orders of removal issued by an immigration judge. And I'm guessing what it is going to go on to say in other pages is that we're allowed to do it in your home now. So kudos to me. Everyone can thank me for bringing this into the universe, willing it into existence. Obviously, I'm joking. This was issued in May 2025. But of course, I will argue vigorously against it. And you shouldn't take my kind of like hesitancy when I was asked the question by Kyle as my position here. I do think that in order to get into the home of an individual, it should be required for you to get a judicial warrant, not just an administrative warrant. You should have to go to a neutral magistrate, a neutral arbiter, not just another lackey of the administration. So don't take my hesitancy in answering that question for my disposition here. And obviously, we're all against this shit. And just to give some additional policy reasons why to be against it is they will use this, right, to search anything they want of any person. They'll just say, oh, we just needed to search this for an illegal alien. We thought one was there. There was an insider. There was some. So this is very dangerous, because if you let them do this, then what good is the Fourth Amendment at all with respect to seizures and searches in your house for even U.S. citizens, if they can just claim internally the authority to go search for aliens to arrest? And the only check on that is a probable cause determination by one of these ICE agents. Like, it's all ICE checking themselves. And we already don't trust ICE and DHS. So how can we have that standard? It's a big gaping hole that they're going to be able to use to try to abuse their political rivals, even outside the context of quote unquote illegal aliens. So that is, I think, the I'm just reading something. That is, I think, one of the most disgusting intrusions into our constitutional jurisprudence that we've had so far, is this notion that ICE can decide for itself to go into your home whenever you want on probable cause determinations made by them regarding the presence of aliens, or I should say non-citizens, who they allege are removable. Okay, so I'm going to call this guy. Hey, bro, I'm going to call you. Good. Okay. Thank you for the membership. Almost our 1 year anniversary, Bay. Thanks.
Hey.
Yo, what's up? Hang on a second.
Hang on a second.
You got to turn off the. Oh, is your stream on, or is this just on speakerphone?
Okay, hold on. Let me get camera. No?
Testing 1 2 3.
Right.
Testing 1 2 3.
So there's an
Yeah,
echo.
I can hear you.
So there's an echo.
Do you happen to have headphones on
I'm gonna have headphones on.
that you can use?
I have headphones on right now. Do you see me?
Oh, I see you for sure. Just let me a second to show myself to you. Let's just see real quick. Then I'll switch this. But I just want to make sure that okay, there we go. There's no echo now, but I'm assuming that you're changing your audio input. Testing, testing, testing. I can't hear you now. But I can show people what you're going to be shown in like 5 seconds if that's okay. If I have your consent to be shown on camera, I assume that that's okay.
Still have echo?
Testing, testing, 1 2 3.
I can do my phone if need be.
Maybe the phone would be better because it's a pretty bad echo.
All right. Yeah.
Oh. But then we're not going to see him. Or maybe he can do this.
Yeah, you hear me?
Yep. Testing, testing, 1 2 3. There's no echo. That's better, but I can't see you anymore. Let me think. So
I'm fine. I'm fine just doing audio if you are, but
I prefer to see you actually. Can you
Okay.
go? What is the mic that you're using for your Discord? You've never used this for a call, have you?
no, but I'm using OBS, so it's like the internal setup.
Oh, so
Like-
what I think is happening is do you have like some sort of like virtual cable that's connected to your OBS?
No, not really.
So when you go to Discord voice and video, what does the input device say for microphone? People want to see your
Okay, it
beautiful
says
mug.
earpods. I mean, it says earpods because that's how I'm listening to it
Got
too.
it.
But
So for microphone, maybe you should. Do you have another microphone besides the ones that are on your AirPods, or do you just have your AirPods?
yeah, let me try this. I'm gonna hop on. Yeah.
Yep.
Can you
So
hear it?
testing, 1 2 3.
Testing 1 2 3.
Yeah. So we have the echo still. So now try changing the input to a different mic.
Okay. Yeah, I'm on the other mic.
Oh, I'm
Let
sorry.
me try.
It should be.
Yeah, I just switched the mic, but
So what is the mic now that's selected?
it is MacBook Air.
MacBook Air. And where's the sound coming out of? The speakers of the.
It's coming out of the laptop.
All right. So now for speakers, you're gonna want to make that your headphones. Testing 1 2 3. Okay, so now we're not hearing you. So check the microphone again. This will sometimes happen when you use AirPods. Okay, so the speaker right now says is the MacBook, right? MacBook, right? By chance, are you on the browser or are you?
Earpods.
Huh. Let me think. Are you on a browser or are you on an app?
On the browser.
That might be an issue. But we can just use your phone if that works.
Yeah, that works.
Okay. Why don't you rejoin? Couldn't you do phone and muted video? Yeah, I think we can. So here's something that we could try. But it's a little weird because I don't think you could join a call with the same account on 2 different devices. But if you had 2 Discord accounts, you could. Oh, here's something that we could do. All right. Do you have Zoom? Or
I think so.
All right, so this is what I'm going to do, all right? So you're going to join the call again with your computer. You're going to mute yourself on Discord, and I'm going to send you a Zoom link, and we'll transmit audio through Zoom. I'll mute myself as well on Discord, and they'll just see you on Discord, and we'll talk through Zoom, okay?
Okay, I can try that.
So I'm going to get you a link in a second, all right? Don't worry about putting sounds on the link, and you're gonna join the Zoom link on your phone. Okay.
Okay.
Just give me a second to work this out. I wanna be the very best. No. Catch them is my best.
Yeah, it's usually just weird switching between that OBS setup and just normal calls.
So you have OBS? You have OBS on? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So I'm about to share a link with you. Appreciate everyone's patience. And again, you're going to join this through your phone. Is it okay to send on Discord the link, or would you prefer through Twitter?
Discord's fine.
Okay. Here's the link for the Zoom.
All right.
I'm going to mute myself on Discord. Traveled across the land. Sorry, guys. Appreciate your patience. Trying to figure it out. Yeah, I don't know that he needs to have OBS on, but I don't know why. Maybe he's recording it. My guess is he's using some kind of virtual cable, or it's just coming out of the speakers. And so that's how we're getting the feedback. That's my guess. But again, I don't know. I'm just a gangster, I suppose. And I want my corners. Name the show. He's recording his own version, probably. Yeah, maybe. That could be true. You may be right. I may be crazy.
Yeah.
Yo.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, beautiful. So now join.
Video.
Yeah, and just mute yourself on Discord.
Cool.
And then we'll everything will be okay. And guys, you can hear him, right, when he spoke. Right now, your video is not coming through. Are you trying to join the Discord with your phone? Remember, you got to join that with your computer.
No, I'm joining with computer.
Okay. Oh, there you go. Beautiful. All right, 1 second. And everyone can hear you. Try talking.
Hello, hello.
Okay, perfect. All right, I'm now going to show you. And 3, 2, 1. There we go. Yo, what up? How we doing? What's good? Welcome to the stream. Why don't you introduce yourself to everyone else, because they're all dying to find out who you are and what you're about.
How's it going? My name's Spencer. I'm a MAGA guy who's into politics. I met Pisco at the Word War debate. Trying to put out some content here and there on politics and just arguments. I wouldn't consider myself an established debater, but I did debate Destiny in San Francisco.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you mentioned.
First ever. Yeah, that was my first ever formal debate. And like I'm not a trained debater. I didn't do debate club in high school, college. So
we're just talking.
Yeah, we're just talking.
But no, I appreciate you saying that. No, it was a nice encounter at Word War debate at Word War One. I think that you were at the after party as well, or one of the middle parties. So it was great to meet someone who got to hear my worldview. So tell us a little bit. So you consider yourself more MAGA. You're interested in making more political content. Tell us a little bit about that. Have you always been a Republican? Or do you consider yourself a Republican, or more just populist MAGA? And who are your big inspirations?
I think like in high school, I wasn't very political. So like Nick Fuentes goes all the way back to high school, right? But like when I really entered college, I think that's where I started to just align with Trump, or I was backing Trump. And then, I just voted for him 3 times. And I've always had like these arguments in my head, and I go a little crazy just keeping them in my head. I need to get them out there. So, and also I live in California, like I've found that like a lot of liberals don't want to talk about this. And it's like, I can talk about it civilly, but it seems like they always have a problem, or they always get into their emotions after you're talking about it. So
you found that a lot of the people who are more left wing in your life, and to be clear for the audience, are those more left wing people? These are friends, family. Do you go to college or from high school, or people like that?
No, I'm an analyst right now. I just work a 9 to 5,
cool.
But I went to college, so I definitely saw that in college. And like everyone I'm surrounded by, friends, family, they're all liberals, to varying extents. But
so you're an iconoclast really in your social circle there in Commie, California.
Right. Yeah. And like, it's actually really rare to find a conservative where I'm from. And then when I do like find a conservative, it's not that I find that I don't relate to them all that much. Like I live a very liberal lifestyle. I was raised liberal, but as far as the arguments and the principles, I'm MAGA. So
okay, so the 3 kind of topics that I'd love to cover with you are the ones that you brought up, are January 6th, Renee Good, and then the socialism/third party politics. I do want to get into that, but could you, before we get into Jan 6 as the first one, could you lay out why you consider yourself a Trump supporter? From an identity perspective, like why do you affiliate yourself with Trump? You mentioned that you live a more liberal lifestyle. What is it about Trump's either politics or who he is that has gotten you to be a fan?
I think mostly Trump was the like anti-left, and I think he just aligns more with my demographic, young men, straight young men. So it's like, I think there was actually kind of an era of oppression of my demographic in a sense, not like there's worse oppression, but censorship definitely. And so it's rooted pretty deep, but also, I guess like conservative principles.
Like which ones? Like social conservatism, or more fiscal conservatism, or in what sense do you find him a conservative?
I think that I would say like social issues, socially conservative issues are more like morally good.
Got
And
it.
it seems like a lot of liberals really aren't like checking um, like their behaviors
Mm.
against any sort of moral standard. So it's like, yeah, we can get into. I think
Yeah.
it'll come out more in the
All right, so
conversation, but it's just
let's go into the
hard to
conversation,
summarize.
and
Yeah,
I'll give you some points of contact, right? Because I was interested to know that the Jan 6 was the topic that you first wanted to discuss, because I think that's a perfect microcosm, or I should say, an example. It epitomizes everything I love versus everything I hate, at least from my perspective. So you give you a touchstone. To me, January 6th represents an idiocracy. It represents lies. It represents an attempt to destroy what I love, this country and this Constitution. And to me, it's a seminal moment in our history because historically it represents a sea change from a pretty vibrant precedent that the United States has in peaceful transfers of power. And so for me, it's a big rallying cry because I think it epitomizes everything that's wrong with MAGA and Trumpism. But surely you have a different view.
yeah. So I don't support January 6th itself.
Mm-hmm.
I just always push back on the leftist or the liberal arguments that Trump incited an insurrection.
Ah,
And most of my argument is going to be that, like, okay, January 6th was bad, but it doesn't really matter, and it pales in comparison with the BLM and Antifa riots that happened the year prior for a much longer time frame, and I believe it was more significant.
So I'm extracting kind of two issues there. The first is the issue of specific culpability for the specific thing called incitement. That's the first objection you would raise. And the second appears to be some sort of like hypocrisy argument, or at a very minimum, a kind of comparison in terms of the magnitude of harm from BLM/Antifa in a given time period versus January 6th. So I'm happy to do either of those that you want to do, and it's dealer's choice. Which do you like to address first?
I mean, no, we can talk about January 6th and we can talk about the incitement. If you believe Trump incited an insurrection first, that's just more my context for why I don't place as much value on January 6th as someone like you would, is because of the context of BLM Antifa.
Yeah, so I guess I want to be clear by what I mean when I say I think Trump incited January 6th and what I think is an insurrection. When I say that, I'm just saying that he legally committed incitement. But even if I were convinced, and this maybe gets to the heart of it, but though I'm not at all afraid to talk about my opinion about incitement with respect to Trump on Jan 6, even if I wasn't convinced that his speech rose to the level of incitement as expounded by the Supreme Court in this case called Brandenburg v. Ohio, even if I didn't think that it rose to that level, it wouldn't change significantly a lot of the culpability that I think he has for Jan 6 and the broader attempt to steal the election, right? So like, it doesn't seem like, even if you were successful in convincing me that you were right about the specific culpability with respect to incitement, I could grant you that, and I would still put a great deal of moral responsibility on Trump for January 6th, as well as both moral and legal culpability for the broader conspiracies and attempt to steal the election. And so I'm happy to go into the legal nuances of Brandenburg and to actually test the incitement stuff, but I don't think it's getting to the heart of your criticism, which has to do more about like moral responsibility and the sort of the weight that liberals put on the event as opposed to the legal determination. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that the moral conversation is what I'm focused on.
Okay.
The legality actually doesn't have any bearing to me, like, because legality doesn't indicate morality. So let's just focus on that.
I understand that.
Part.
I think that sometimes legality will play into priors about whether something is good or bad in that following ways. Either A, it will be like a default presumption that following the law is good in general, right? It'll be a presumption, a rebuttable presumption, no doubt. Sometimes breaking the law is good, but it provides you sort of a default. And second, the law itself is usually informed by some kind of intersubjective view on morality. But I agree with you that just knowing something is legal or illegal doesn't give you the answer. So let's stick on the moral argument then, putting aside the specific legal inquiry, since it doesn't matter as much to you, of incitement. I mean, the dude tried to steal the 2020 election. He tried to do so in like absolutely insane ways, and it is a disgrace. So let's talk about it. What are your thoughts?
You think he stole the he stole the 2020 election?
He tried
because
to.
That's the argument. That's the argument that the J6ers have.
Oh, I know that's the argument that they have.
The Democrats.
I know it's the arguments that the J6 argument is the 2020 election was actually stolen by Biden and the Democrats. And I know that that's their argument. My argument is that Trump.
Well, that's what they believe. Real quick. That's what they believe. And so this conversation and is just involving what people believe, what the J6ers believe, and what Trump believes.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think the majority of the J6ers believe the election was stolen?
I think that the majority. I think the majority of the J6ers believe Trump's lies. Yes.
And then okay. I would disagree that it's a lie, but do you think that Trump believed the election was stolen?
No.
Or do you think he's okay? So that's consistent, at least.
Yeah.
Where do we start? I have some good questions, kind of probing questions.
You can ask me questions, but just to tell you where
I'm not gonna prove a negative. You know what I mean? Like
what's the negative
or prove that January 6th wasn't an insurrection. I think that's kind of
the insurrection is also unfortunately like one of these legal questions, right? Right, like it's my belief that whether or not Jan 6 is an insurrection legally, right? That's a determination that has some weight to it because I believe it plays into my Section 3 argument, etc. But even if you were successful on the argument that that it wouldn't meet the legal test of insurrection, we're running into the same problem. Whether it's incitement legally or insurrection legally, on the specific moral question, it's not going to move us fundamentally. If you were to convince me, actually, no, the legal test for insurrection is a super high bar, and I'm like, you know what? He's right. It wouldn't really affect the fundamentals of how I view the situation, which is kind of baked in on the conduct side, regardless of whether or not it meets the legal threshold for insurrection or incitement. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I am focused on like the more meaningful part of this discussion. And so do you think that an insurrection is meaningfully significant to a riot, to a violent riot?
I don't know what you mean by that. So I have to ask you to clarify.
Do you think that they're meaningfully different? Like if you had a year-long violent riots that happened the year prior to a single day insurrection, like
I believe
if we knew nothing about it, how is it meaningfully different? How is it meaningfully significant for it to be an insurrection? If like the moral weight.
Yeah. So if by meaningfully the same or significantly different or whatever you want to say in terms of the comparison between generic riot versus generic insurrection, the answer is the reason they're significantly different is because their definitions are different. If you want to compare between a riot or an insurrection, I will grant that there are some riots that are worse than some insurrections, and I can imagine riots that don't meet the legal test of insurrection that are like 1,000 times worse than an insurrection. So when I'm talking about the legal argument on insurrection riot, people misunderstand what I'm saying. It's not because it reaches the threshold of insurrection that it becomes the worst thing ever or worse than the riots that occurred in 2020. Those are just separate arguments about what are the consequences of an insurrection.
I think I know where we can go with this.
Yeah, so let's go.
Do you think that the J6 insurrection specifically was worse, did more harm for our country than the BLM and Antifa riots?
Undoubtedly.
In its totality?
Yes, 100%. And it doesn't have to do with lives lost, and it doesn't have to do with the amount of property damage.
So, help me understand that, because even if they did storm the Capitol and nothing really resulted of it, they weren't going to successfully coup the government. So versus in the streets, BLM and Antifa rioters, there were traffic stops on the highway, Gestapo, people moving around in mobs, surrounding vehicles, bashing them in with bats. Like, brutally assaulting business owners, beating them within an inch of their life. Like, and I believe that strikes more intimidation. There's more of an intimidation factor
Mm.
in all the major cities across the U.S. than me here in California. If I was a liberal and January 6th happened, I wouldn't feel intimidated by that. I would feel that the situation is pretty much under control, or they weren't able to successfully coup the government. So,
Yeah, but that's taken
and they
a
weren't even
post
close, right?
that's taken a post hoc look at the event itself. Post hoc to look at it and say, oh well, because we know that the what I'm going to call the insurrectionists, the terrorists, were defeated. Therefore, because they were defeated, it's not as bad as these other places and other situations.
But what could they have done that would have like led to the Proud Boys running our country?
Let's just talk about. Well, I don't know that we would grant that the Proud Boys running the country, but I'll list you stuff that they could have done, and you can tell me whether or not you think that there was a possibility, a significant possibility, by which I mean, a couple percentage points possibility. Hurt or kill members of the government. Was there a risk of that? Significant risk?
Yeah.
Yes.
Significant risk.
Delay the certification of the electoral count. It happened. Was there a risk of that?
but yes, there's a risk of it. Yeah.
Delay it sufficiently such that the vote doesn't happen.
What do you mean? What do you mean that a vote doesn't happen?
That Trump is successful. That Trump declares that calls in the Insurrection Act, declares an insurrection, and orders his National Guard.
So, like, if he was lying, that would be stealing. You're saying that would be stealing.
Was there? I'm asking. Do you think that at the time that January 6th was happening, do you think there's a risk that Trump could go all in and be successful?
Okay, so Trump.
Yeah, the rioters kidnap members of Congress, and Trump is able to prevent them from voting.
When that wasn't the true result.
Right.
Yeah, there's a risk for that. There's a risk for that.
So this is why it's so much worse than the BLM stuff, and I'll tell you why. Let me just be.
But real quick.
Yeah.
Trumpers, MAGA, and J6ers believe the election was stolen before they got to that moment.
I know.
So that's why that's just not that significant to me.
Wait, no, but there's no like ignorance. Like if someone shoots your entire family and is like, "Well, I thought they were aliens," are you gonna be? Oh, then I guess it's not. Like that doesn't help. The delusion factor.
That is not that situation, though. Yeah, but yes.
I understand they're not the same. I'm using a ridiculous example. The reason I use a ridiculous example is to prove the principle. And the principle is as follows: that ignorance for me, in terms of the moral consequence here, is not a defense. These people, A, they should have known better, but B, they were in my opinion, being lied to by Trump. But C, it doesn't matter.
Well,
it doesn't matter.
It's more like I'm saying they have reason to believe that the Democrats stole the 2020 election.
Oh, then we're going to have to fight on that.
Basis.
So you think that they have good reason to believe, not just any reason, good reason to believe?
No, a reasonable belief that the Democrats.
That's what we're going to contest.
Person standards. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about it. In virtue of what would a reasonable person have a basis to believe the election was stolen in 2020?
I think the prominence of so many mail-in ballots, that's just a voting process that's susceptible to a ton of corruption.
Yeah, but susceptibility to corruption doesn't mean that it was in fact corrupt. Even if it were true that it was susceptible.
An open border and the possibility of a mass importing voter scheme,
those are possibilities.
Why there's a reason to believe, and a reasonable reason to believe that.
Well, but is that true of 2024 as well?
What?
The reasonable belief.
No, they didn't have. I don't think it'd be reasonable to say that Trump was committing a mass importing voter scheme.
In virtue of what? You would agree in 2024, there's still a significant risk, on your view, of mail-in. There's wide mail-in voting in 2024. Republicans took advantage of that. You agree with that?
No, I wouldn't agree that they took advantage of that.
No,
What do you mean?
that the Republicans voted on vote by mail in record numbers.
Mail-in ballots existed, but the Republicans were openly against these kinds of things.
No, I'm saying in
Like, they were
2020, I'm
openly-
talking about 2024, they weren't. In 2024, Republicans, yeah, less than Democrats still, but Republicans voted vote by mail a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm asking you, in virtue of what?
And then
is
the
it-
last two would just be the massive spike, like seemingly irregular spikes in votes, like
well, let's do it
at
one
the
by
wee
one,
hours
right?
in the morning, huh?
Let's do it one by one. Let's be analytical.
Okay. And then just last one. I'll let you go through
Yeah.
one by one. But then also, I would say, I think the failure to have independent auditors would be another one.
Okay, so
go ahead.
just to make sure we've got them all. So number one is rampant mail-in voting. Number two, which is susceptible to fraud. Number two is open border, susceptible to fraud. Number three is, are you disagreeing with my distillation?
I'm not going to use the mass importing voter scheme for 2020.
Yeah, because you got a problem there,
anything,
right? Because Trump was in
what?
office. 'Cause you have a problem there because Trump was in office.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we have no reason to believe that Trump was committing a mass importing voter scheme. So
Okay, so then on 2020, the evidence for it being stolen, that a reasonable person would say the election was stolen in 2020, is because of massive mail-in voting, which is susceptible in your mind to fraud.
and Democrats calling for people to vote by mail. That was like one of their main strategies that they're
Is
publicly
that
putting out.
an additional factor, or is that part of that same factor?
That's part of that same factor.
Okay, so
But I'm removing.
mail-
Like, we don't even need to talk about the importing voter scheme.
Okay, so we don't talk about that. So I'm just trying to now distill the three things that you put out
Yeah.
so far: massive mail-in voting and encouragement of mail-in voting. That's one. Number two is the massive spikes at given times for one candidate or another candidate. That's
Yeah,
That was
all Biden votes. I think it was in like Michigan or something at like 2 a.m. in the morning. That's just a irregularity. That's just an irregularity.
so
Yeah.
the existence of the irregularity of what you're characterizing as the spike in votes.
Yes.
And remind me the third one. There was one other one that
And then independent
the failure to have independent
auditors
audits. Okay.
in a lot of these states.
Okay, got it. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just telling you my tactic. I'm telling you my debate tactic, okay? This is my, because I think that's all crazy, what you just said. I don't think it's a basis to believe the election is stolen. I think it's totally irrational. And what I'm going to try to do to show that is to show you that the 2024 election on that front is on all fours, and all three factors are present in 2024. And you're going to have to say, well, therefore, a reasonable person would believe the 2024 election was stolen. I could do that in 2016 too. Maybe less so because there was less mail-in voting then.
Trump and the Republicans weren't calling for people to vote by mail.
They were in 2024. They were.
Okay, I disagree with that, but
wait. So now that's just a factual issue. I'm going to pull up tweets of them encouraging vote by mail, of Trump specifically tweeting about it. And when I do, what will you say? I was wrong about that?
Yeah.
All right. So we're gonna take the time to get the tweets. Trump encouraging vote by mail in 2024. And by the way, I think he actually voted by mail.
That's
a CNN article, June 4th, 2024. Trump pushes early and mail-in voting initiative ahead of November despite casting doubt on voting methods for years. The Trump campaign on Tuesday announced a new program aimed at promoting absentee mail-in and early in-person voting, practices that former President Donald Trump has disparaged for years while promoting false claims of widespread voter fraud in 2020 presidential election. The new effort, dubbed, quote, Swamp the Vote USA, comes as Republican officials ramp up calls for their voter base to embrace early voting and vote by mail options ahead of the November election. The new initiative is part of, quote, Trump Force 47, which is sponsored by the RNC and is focused on turning out voters in battleground states. It marks a sharp reversal from Trump's repeated calls to end the practice of mail-in voting altogether and his discouragement of Republicans from voting any other way but at the polls on Election Day. Quote, Republicans must win, and we will use every appropriate tool to beat the Democrats because they are destroying our country. Whether you vote absentee, by mail, early in person, or on Election Day, we're going to protect the vote. We make sure your ballot is secure and your voice is heard. Trump, the presumptive presidential nominee, said in a statement on Tuesday. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just a statement of, it's just a fact that they pushed hard for mail-in voting in 2024.
Okay. Yeah. So factually, I'll concede that.
Okay.
I'll concede that point. But when you're comparing, now you're asking me, do you believe all those same things with 2024
Yeah.
to believe that the 2024 election was rigged? And to me, when we're talking about 2024, now we have to talk about the mass importing voter scheme that the Democrats committed, and that corruption outweighs like all of those 3 points. I'm not.
No,
I'm not
but
even
right,
saying
but right, 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 but right, but
I'm
Trump,
not even saying
but
I
right, but
thoroughly
Trump
believe
won. Wait,
2020
wait,
was.
wait, wait, but Trump won the 2024 election.
Yeah, but you're creating a hypothetical as like, oh, why wouldn't I believe? Why wouldn't I believe that this was corrupt?
Yeah, yeah. So
Why would? Yeah,
presumably, you would think if the importation of voters is relevant to the 2024 election, that would lower your confidence in 2024, not raise it. You
say that again.
understand? So you took the importing voters factor off the table for 2020, and now it's on the table for 2024. But that surely can't make 2024 more secure. It would make it less secure. But Trump won 2024 and lost 2020.
It would make it. It would give more evidence that it was corrupted by the Democrats because the Democrats were encouraging pathway to citizenship, and they're the ones who had the open border policy. So
Right,
I'm just saying.
Yeah, but Trump won.
Yeah, no, I know. But
Right,
this
so-
is your hypothetical. This is your hypothetical.
Well, no, it's not. I'm not asking for a hypothetical. I'm saying
To demonstrate why, or my hypocrisy, why I don't care about the corruption here.
right. So like the fact that there was in your mind,
No,
even though I don't think there's
saying
any.
you might be able to reasonably believe on the same criteria that I had for 2020 that okay, the 2024 election was stolen.
Yeah, it proves too
But
much.
I also have more evidence now. I also have more evidence to distrust the Democrats in their political strategy, in their messaging, for busing people to the voting booths. You know,
Right, but
providing
that's beyond the scope of the
openly
analysis,
expressing,
right? That's beyond the
putting them
scope.
up in hotels. You know, busing them to the voting booths. We'll provide a translator. We'll provide all the resources you need. So
Yeah.
all of a sudden,
So first of all, I would
just
take issue
believe
with the
we're-
factual statements
Yeah.
that you're making right there. Just to be clear, I would like this whole like
You
we're
think
gonna
they weren't saying that, or they didn't create an app for all this, like
for what specifically to vote for illegal immigrants.
process illegal, well, the app to process illegal immigrants, and then
That-
the outward
that is not what you
expression
said.
that we want to expedite pathways to citizenship, and then the combination of putting them up in hotels, busing them to the
And
voting
none
booth.
of that is. Wait. Busing illegal immigrants to the voting booths. That's what I want to know about.
Yes.
When did that happen?
I'm claiming it happened in
Where?
the 2024 election.
You're claiming that
See, now
Democrats.
we're talking about 2024, but you compared it to 2024.
No, yeah, the
And I'm
comparison
saying
is.
in 2024, I have more evidence of the Democrats' corrupt practices in 2024.
They must be very
But they're
incompetent
compl-
because they lost the election. Is what I'm saying.
I think it was just too big to rig. Too big to rig.
Okay. So let's tell you. I'm telling you what I'm doing. Right. The reason I'm
Yeah.
comparing to 2024 is to show you that your evidence is not evidence at all. It's just a cui bono story about, and it's just conjecture. So, and it proves too much. If it were enough to have a voter system that is conceivably susceptible to great amounts of voter fraud, which I don't, by the way, I don't grant that. I don't grant that the system we had in 2020 or 2024 was susceptible to large amounts of voter fraud. I think it's highly resistant to that kind of fraud for reasons that we can talk about. But even if I were to grant that, like that would cast doubt on every election we've ever had. As well as we didn't get to it, but like there weren't like nearly as many independent audits in 2024 as in 2020.
It would
No,
cast doubt.
if we applied your insane standard. If we applied your insane, what I'm characterizing as your standard, which is insane in my
I'm saying
is
you
my
can
view.
believe the 2024 election was rigged off of the same criteria.
And I don't
Problem
though.
is-
The problem is I don't because I don't have an insane standard.
I don't
have
need
a,
you to.
I have a sane standard, not an insane standard. So me trying to give you this comparison is to try to convince you and bring you into my confidence and say, hey, dude, this is an insane standard. The standard basically is no evidence of specific voter fraud, no evidence of votes cast by illegal immigrants.
I'm not saying there's evidence. I'm just saying there is reason to believe that it was stolen.
Don't you think part of having
Reasonable
a reasonable belief is premised on evidence?
I don't know if I would agree with that. Well, it depends. Everyone has different types of evidence. Everyone has different standards of evidence. You know, like what a Christian has a spiritual experience, and he thinks that's evidence. He has some conjecture and some story, and he places that evidence higher than someone else's. So we all have different standards of evidence. But
Yeah, I mean,
I'm fine calling into question like elections, our
so if I called
constitution,
into
all of
question
it.
2024 and I said Trump wasn't actually elected, you'd have no grounds to resist me, right? You'd be on no firm
Yeah,
grounds to resist my claims. And that can't be
yeah.
right.
But this isn't necessarily what I believe. I just more vaguely believe that the Democrats are corrupt, and I think the mass importing voter scheme is more significant.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, but
but
it's
I'm
not.
just establishing my basis for the J6ers to reasonably believe that the election was stolen.
Well, I know that that's what we're. So zooming
Yeah.
out, yes, we're trying to establish whether the belief was reasonable or not, for purposes of castigating the people who were on January 6th. It's and so yeah, I totally agree that what we're talking about here isn't necessarily like proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that one way or the other. What we're trying to talk about is what a reasonable person would assume, what a reasonable person would see, and what a reasonable person would think. And my
Who
contention is,
has control over the evidence? You're saying there's no evidence, but who has control over the evidence? This is going to be information that we're not privy to. You know,
about
it's like
In Georgia, Republicans, in Arizona, Republicans in 2020.
but I don't trust that. I don't trust it just because it's a Republican
So
did it.
what would it
Some
take for me
Republican
to
politician did it.
so what would it take for me to prove that the 2020 election was fairly run? What would convince you?
Probably like insider knowledge. You know, like insider.
So we have
Not
Stephen.
the problem is it's done in all these different states. So it'd
That's
be
the
very
problem.
hard to
No,
do.
that's the beauty of the
It's a very
Constitution. That's one of the strengths of our system is because it's run not in a central way, and because there's local and state control. It's actually really difficult logistically to do fraud without being caught in general, but also to do kind of systemic fraud that affects the result of the election.
I don't know what you would have to do to prove that it was fairly run.
Then that's
but
a problem, right?
burden.
No,
That's
no,
not
no,
my burden.
no.
That's
I'm not saying.
I'm not
I'm not.
making the
No,
argument.
no. I'm not saying that it's your burden to show the election was fair. But you need to tell me what the criteria is, what burden I need to rise to. And what you're saying is, I can't even tell you what kind of evidence would change my mind. And that's starting to seem like it's an unfalsifiable claim. If you can't even think about what would convince you.
No,
You understand?
I just don't know. Like on the spot, I don't know exactly how.
What if Trump said it was fair? Would it convince
all the
you?
criteria that I would factor in.
If this is so, if Trump came out and said, actually, I looked at everything and 2020 was run fair, would you believe him?
No, I wouldn't just believe him.
So what would it
That's
take?
just one person.
So there's
That's just
nothing.
one person.
Okay.
That's just one. No, that's just one person.
So
I
Trump
wouldn't believe it
Trump comes out and said, Trump
it's
says,
just coming from one guy.
Trump says, I admit I lied. He says that, and he said, and I was wrong, and I'm sorry, and I want to get, I had this in my heart this whole time, and actually Joe Biden won, and it was fair and square. You would say I don't believe him.
No, I would say I believe that.
Why?
Because why would Trump admit something like that? That's bad optically, bad for his position.
Yeah, and there's a ton of stories like that of Republicans who are statements against interest. For example, do you want to go through them? But the problem is you're going to say all these people are swamp creatures. They're all not really Republicans. They don't support the president. None of them are on the team.
I don't value what politicians say.
Except for Trump.
I don't.
Because you just said if Trump admitted in a statement against interest,
No, but
that you would believe him.
in his specific situation, where it's like there would be no reason. There would be no reason to admit that.
There's a lot of people like that who supported Trump in 2020, who were in positions of authority, who absolutely wanted Trump to win, who campaigned for Trump, who said that, but you don't believe them because they're not Trump. It feels like a cult, and I'm not trying to do that to castigate you. It's because it really does feel.
It's fine. No, I see your perspective. It's fine. But I see. The problem is I see their perspective too, and that there's a reasonable basis to believe something.
Not if it's
like that.
unfalsifiable.
And that wasn't even my
Wait,
core
it's
argument.
but
but
I
because we
understand.
couldn't come
I
to,
understand, but I just wanted to be clear about something. We can agree to disagree on a bunch of stuff, but the belief isn't reasonable if it's literally unfalsifiable.
Wait, how is it unfalsifiable?
If there are no means by which these people would be convinced, absent Trump's statement to the contrary, that the election.
No, that would be Trump would be the falsifier. Trump would be.
I would say
Trump would be the falsifier
effectively
in a specific.
No.
situation.
So I will grant to you that the falsifiability of it turns on Trump's statement. But if that's the only means by which to falsify the claim of fraud, that's not reasonable.
All right.
And you would never grant that of the other side. If Democrats came to you and said, well, it was stolen because until the Democrat who was running says that it's not, then it's reasonable for me to believe it was stolen. And you'd be on no good ground, right?
You gotta look at people's like political stances, like the actual political stances of the left and the right to give you the context in these situations. You can't just analyze the principle alone. And I'm not gonna treat the left the same exact way I'm going to treat the right, because I believe they've already corrupted our democracy, because they already excused an era of political violence with BLM and Antifa riots. And I believe, like a lot of right-wingers believe, that we've been in a state of cold civil war for a long time. And so that's why I'm not applying the same principles to both sides.
Yeah, but no,
you know what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying. But the question isn't one about values, which is the kind of what you're getting at. Like the left has already corrupted this. We're already in a soft, Cold War, whatever you want to call it, cold civil war. Those get to questions of like culpability for the Democrats, but we're not talking about issues of like moral fault. What we're talking here is an epistemic question. It's a question of knowledge. And on that front, it really does feel like you should be providing a uniform standard. That is to say that with respect to what you consider to be a reasonable belief, if a Democrat came up to you and said, hey, I know that I'm morally dark or whatever, and I know that I'm like a bad person, but I have a reasonable belief that Trump lost the 2024 election. You would apply the same standard, I would hope, on the epistemic question, not on the moral culpability and other stuff, but on the epistemic question of whether, in fact, there was a reasonable belief. You'd apply a consistent standard, wouldn't you? That's a knowledge question. That's not a question of fault. It's a question of whether the belief is reasonable from an objective perspective, by which we mean intersubjectively. Do you understand what I'm saying? So, like, you might apply different standards in terms of.
That last
okay,
part,
all right.
But I understand.
No, because it's really important. So I understand people might treat MAGA and Democrats differently in many different areas, and both sides do it, right? The Democrats treat MAGA with way less sympathy than their own side, vice versa. But that's not what we're talking about here, where you're like, I'm justified in treating them differently. What we're talking about here is an epistemic question, by which we mean relates to knowledge. It relates to knowledge and the acquisition of knowledge. And we're assessing whether or not we believe that one knowledge, a sort of belief on one with respect to something, is either reasonable or not reasonable. And I don't really see the same justification for treating the reasonability of a belief between two political groups differently in that sense.
I think the topic of evidence is important, because like there's a J6er is not going to have all the court evidence, of these definitions, whatever, of the case details. Their evidence is going to be something like Twitter, is going to be something like all these videos they see, and but that's still a standard of evidence. It's just a different type of evidence. So I'm saying a J6er, seeing what he has seen, would probably reasonably believe that the election was stolen.
That's the whole issue we're fighting about right now, is the reasonability issue. And you can say something like, well, a J6er who has an unhealthy Twitter feed, who is emotionally immature, who has cultish devotion to Trump, who would averagely believe this. And on that view, just look at the polling. But that's, of course, not how I judge reasonability with respect to, as a reference point, the average cultish MAGA person, or indeed the average Republican. My notion of reasonability
you would have to
is
go
different
in and
than that.
prove that all of his sources. You would have to go in and prove that his sources of evidence are just a worse standard of evidence than something like, court decisions, which also is susceptible to corruption, which also covers up information that we're not privy to. So
Yeah.
it's like,
So if reasonability turns on me having to contend with an information stream of garbage, then we're
it's a
fucked.
very hard argument to make.
No, because then you're going to be fucked on BLM too, because you're not going to be able to condemn them, because they're going to be able to say, well, I thought that cops were killing unarmed black people by the 1,000 every day because that's what I was told. And I'm going to be like, well, can you really call that belief unreasonable? Because they were just getting all of their shit from like commies on Twitter. And you're going to be like, of course I can. Of course I can still condemn them, because I don't have to take a look at this from their like idiosyncratic information stream. I get to consider the reasonability of their belief with reference to like the reasonable person standard. And so I hope that you see that when you create a standard like this that morphs along with the peculiarities of the most loyal devotees of Trump, you're going to make a mess for yourself when we try to apply it to BLM, and you're not going to be able to justify it.
The truth doesn't matter. I understand what you're saying. I'm not saying the truth doesn't matter. I don't know how we got here, to be honest. I have other topics.
Sure. So we can zoom back out. But my position is that it was unreasonable to think the election in 2020 was stolen. And that basically the basis of evidence are mere conjecture, like, oh, it's risky to have this voting procedure. Well, that's not evidence of fucking fraud, dude. Any kind of like evidence of fraud would need to show, like, I don't know, ballots that are fraudulent. It would need to show like unconstitutional processes, perhaps, that were intentionally put there. And there's been litigation about that as well. It would need to show some kind of conspiracy, some evidence of people getting together, talking about it, right, and saying this is our plan here, and there. And there's just no reason to believe that happened. And just saying, well, it's risky. It's not that risky in America, and there isn't a huge problem with this. But it would also, that standard, if applied, could be trivially applied to different elections.
You would need all that to prove the election was stolen. But I'm not saying the election was stolen.
No, I think you would need to.
I think it's.
I think you would need that stuff to have a reasonable belief.
Reason to believe
no. I'm not saying that you would need that to prove it. I think in order to have a reasonable belief of something, there needs to be evidence, some evidence.
But everyone has a different type of standard.
I know. I'm going with what I take to be the reasonable person, and what I take to be the reasonable person isn't going to form belief as to a given thing without some sufficient level of evidence. And I think that on any reasonable standard of evidence, the Trump election fraud shit fails horribly. But we can zoom back out and get outside of the specific beliefs of the people. Even if I granted, like, okay, they're reasonable according to the standard of MAGA people, who the fuck cares? They were trying to, those beliefs need to be channeled through given procedures and given processes. Just because you had a reasonable belief about X doesn't mean you're allowed to ignore the law, ignore the Constitution. So like, it doesn't really help you. Even if I were to grant that it was a reasonable belief, it fails on every front. And of course, how I view the risk calculus and the damage of January 6th isn't because 1,000 people died, like in 9/11, and hundreds of people died in fucking Pearl Harbor, right? It's not because we had billions of dollars of property damage. It was an existential risk to the structure of our Constitution, because there were plausible scenarios whereby Trump would be successful.
Okay, so if the 2020 election was stolen by the Democrats, do you think they would be justified to commit an insurrection?
It depends. It really depends. It really depends. It depends on how and when those claims are challenged and the reasonableness of them. If there was a reasonable set...
No, it's already baked into the hypothetical. It was stolen.
Oh, my bad.
It was stolen.
And there's a reasonable belief that it was stolen?
No, not even the belief anymore. Just if 2020
it was in fact stolen
by the Democrats, would it be justified for them to insurrect?
In general, no.
Okay.
There could be things that could make it that would put that apart. But in general, no.
So wait, if you had a totally corrupted democracy,
right?
There would be no reason to. If you had tyranny,
right.
There would
so
be no reason.
If there were no, in other words, this is the example, right? If you're in some kind of situation of authoritarianism, are you okay?
Yeah. I'm just grabbing my charger.
If our constitutional order had completely fallen apart, if there was no way to channel these complaints such that they could not be aired, and if peaceful I think there's an exhaustion principle before you use violence. And if peaceful protests were insufficient, all those things usually is necessary. Again, there are some crazy hypotheticals, as there are with any principles, that I would be like, yes, of course, insurrect right away, coup right now. All right. So, but I'm not telling you that in every case I'm going to be against an insurrection. But if those things exist, then the answer is no, right? I don't support the Democrats doing an insurrection after Al Gore was, I think, robbed of the election in 2020 or 2000. So it really is. So outside those processes and channels, right? If those things have been corrupted and destroyed such that they have no function and they're basically just rubber stamps, think about like Maduro in Venezuela or some shit like that, which we can get to eventually. I would have no problem with the people rising up against Maduro violently. So yeah, it's different situations. But in America, now, even if it were stolen, no, you need more.
All right. So like, what if there was a mass importing voter scheme and deep state Democrats
corrupted the courts,
conspired
so they wouldn't hear the claims. They corrupted the courts such that they couldn't hear the claims. And the state officials knew about it.
Or the courts, or
right.
It's like a lot of Democrat judges, whatever.
And they're being unfair, right? Not that they're being fair. They're being unfair. They're not following the law. You understand?
Well, they could just interpret each case differently. They can interpret it how they want.
Right, but the judges are behaving.
Isn't that like judicial activism or whatever?
Right,
like
we're presupposing judges behaving unreasonably, right? Not reasonably.
Say that again?
We're presupposing in this scenario, I'm trying to make it easy. We're presupposing the judges aren't hearing the claims, and there's no good reason for them not to hear the claims.
Not hearing them, but just ignoring
ignoring them, denying them, doing something bad with respect to the claims. They're not hearing
choosing not to value that standard of evidence.
Right, you know? right. So they're doing,
which would be corrupt.
They're being unfair and corrupt with respect to the claims at issue.
Not illegal. Corrupt, but not illegal.
Okay. I don't know what you mean. So corrupt, but not illegal. So their actions.
You can do things that are corrupt that aren't.
Yeah, probably you can. Corrupt, but not illegal. Okay.
If that were the case with the whole mass importing voter scheme,
and you have judges who are being corrupt, by which I mean they're doing this for political benefit of Democrats, right? That's corruption. And so what they're doing might not technically, but you can prove that there's political. I actually do think that would be illegal, but let's just grant that it wouldn't be for whatever reason, or even if it is illegal, that it can't be like charged or anything like that. But I want to be clear about in the American context, so my audience knows that I do think that taking some of these official actions, not every action, but a lot of political actions, when it should be neutral, is in fact a violation of the Constitution. But let's assume that it's not.
Well, neutral doesn't mean objective, though. Like,
I know. I mean, when I say neutral, I mean when I say neutral, I mean politically neutral. Okay.
And we're not. Okay. And we're not just talking about the courts and the judges. We're talking about the jury of your peers too. Okay. They're also susceptible to corruption, you know? So it's like these things all involve
the system
people.
has fundamentally broke down, and of the judicial system, you know it was stolen, and
it was stolen via mass importing voter scheme.
Okay. And peaceful protests are insufficient in that case, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
so they're essentially just letting people in to vote for vote for Democrats.
In that hypothetical, I think that society is broken apart enough that I could see a justification for the use of violence in that case after peaceful protest.
Okay,
but just to be clear about that, nowhere near where we were or where we are, not even close. I just want to be clear. If you think that hypothetical gets you even close to what we had, that is not the case, and unfortunately, I don't think you have a deep understanding of why many of these court decisions went the way they did, because the evidence sucked.
I don't.
It was shit. It was dog shit. And the claims are dog shit and contradictory and don't make any sense.
Okay. I'm going to have to trust you on that because I'm not willing to get into it.
Okay.
And you know more about it. So I'll just concede there.
But that's just so you understand where I'm coming from. That's why I think Jan's saying is so bad. It is the culmination of a 2-month-long process, actually even before that, in setting the kind of the tone even before the election, but a process by which Trump was trying to install himself in office, and this is something you would never stomach by a Democrat. If Obama had tried to get Joe Biden to not declare Trump the fucking victor, you would be out on the street yourself. You would be. And it's so shameless that anyone could pretend otherwise. In order to do it, they have to pretend that the courts were unfair to their claims, but the courts were not unfair to their claims. In fact, at times the courts were far too deferential to their claims and entertained them far too long, in my opinion.
Each claim is going to be different, so you can't really say all the claims are
I'm not saying,
you know?
Well, all the claims of voter fraud?
You just used them generally, and I'm saying like each claim is different.
The claims were shit.
Case is
There was one clutch of ballots in Pennsylvania where they did find that certain mail-in ballots voted after X amount of time, that there was an issue there, and from a legal perspective, not a fraud issue, from a legal perspective. Mm-hmm. That was it in terms of meritorious claims.
Mm. Okay.
But
that's pretty much all I have to say on that.
That's why Jan 6 was so bad, in my opinion. And given my view of that, I think that Trump was trying to steal the election. Now let's get into my head, right? Given that I think that Trump was trying to steal the election, and that I thought that there were plausible scenarios by which he would have been able to accomplish that on January 6th, given that, you would understand why I think Jan 6 is so horrible. Given my view that he was trying to steal the election.
Significant moment. Yeah. I see why you guys think it's a significant moment, but I could also say that it's just a significant excuse that you guys are using as an argument to cover up for BLM Antifa. So,
in what sense does it cover up for BLM Antifa?
I don't think that's what you're doing, but because I think you're a good guy.
I just don't understand how it would cover up for BLM or Antifa. I mean, those actions happened before Jan 6, and I'm not sure how it.
Well, it's just an event that takes the headlines when Democrats control the media and they're able to push all this on January 6th, you know? It was only recently that the independent media took over and, yeah, it now controls our information space. So...
Okay. I think that is by virtue of the act's significance. And I think that if you had Democrats try to do those things, I think you would have found that the mainstream media was like incredibly willing to talk about it. But do you want to talk about the other side of the equation, BLM Antifa, or do you want to go on to Renee Good? Up to you.
No, I don't need to talk about BLM Antifa. That's just what I used for this argument. Renee Good. So yeah, do you think that was unjustified or justified?
Yeah, I think it was unjustified in murder.
Murder?
Yeah.
That was actually my first initial reaction too, was to say it was an overextension of force, or effectively like police brutality, like an overextension of force from the law enforcement officer. But, you know, as more clips are getting released, it is kind of a toss-up situation if she's trying to ram him with her vehicle. And also it's tricky because if we use Destiny's definition of an insurrection, all these violent anti-ICE riots are insurrections.
I'm not sure that's true. Destiny got the legal definition of insurrection from me. I gave it to him, and it's the Graeber definition, which, again, I think is pretty remarkably accurate. And if you go through,
can I state that back to you?
Sure.
Can I state that back just so we can confirm? So Destiny's definition was any group that intentionally and violently interferes or impedes on a government proceeding, on a federal government proceeding.
No. Four factors. Well, four elements.
I'm pretty sure that
some of the stuff is
yeah.
It's approximating it, but it's not exactly. That's why I say no. All right.
Okay.
One, an assemblage. Insurrection can't be done by one person. It's a public assemblage. All right. Insurrections also aren't done like covertly. Okay. Like in the those could be other things, right?
No. But the ICE riot as a whole is done by many people.
No, I know. I'm just giving you the elements.
Yeah.
Okay?
And she is a part of that group, though. She's a part of that group. She's saying.
Okay, you could say so. But there's a separate question. They're analytically distinct. the existence of an insurrection and whether a particular person engaged in an insurrection. You agree with that? They're separate. Whether or not there's an insurrection somewhere doesn't mean that everyone that's politically aligned engaged in an insurrection. Agreed?
So wait. The J6ers, if we take
Not everyone engaged in
he didn't
in insurrection.
engage in an insurrection?
Enrico
Tarrio didn't
en-
engage in an insurrection?
Enrico Tarrio himself might have engaged in an insurrection because of his trying to make one happen, either through, I don't know if the right term of art would be incitement here, as opposed to the criminal conspiracy, but yes, mere planning for an insurrection doesn't count as insurrection. The insurrection has to happen. If he took actions while the insurrection was happening to promote it, he could have also engaged in insurrection. As I sit here, I'm not remembering if he specifically messaged during the course of the insurrection, and the planning efforts definitely were seditious conspiracy. So it might fit the
but you're
bill.
trying to say Renee Good as an individual didn't commit an insurrection.
That's not what I'm saying.
She was involved in a larger insurrection.
That is not what I'm saying. You need to be very careful when you listen to what I said. The only thing, and only respond, like, don't try to guess where I'm going, right? That's going to make the conversation horrible to do that, right? It's going to make the conversation impossible because I just want you to agree on things that, like, the basics, so we can build blocks together. We're two kids, we're in the playground, and we're just building things together to see what we agree on. And if you're like, actually, you know what? I don't agree with that. Oh, that's fine. You can take back if you agreed with something or not.
But I disagreed with your last point that, okay, groups commit insurrections, but if an individual a part of an insurrection isn't committing an insurrection.
So that's not exactly what I said. What I said was,
okay,
do you agree? And I'll just assert it, okay? Whether or not there is an insurrection somewhere doesn't mean that is a different question. It's analytically distinct from whether any particular person engaged in said insurrection. They're different questions. You agree that they're different questions? Asking, hey, was there an insurrection that day? And did this person engage in the insurrection?
Okay.
Different questions, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and just being part of a group by itself, I'm just going to tell you right now, is not engagement. Just being part of a group isn't necessarily engagement, okay? Engagement now, joining up. So, for example, if you're part of a group, call it Republicans, and some segment of Republicans engage in an insurrection, or if I were part of a group, call them Democrats, and some segment of Democrats engage in insurrection, that by itself is an engagement in the insurrection. There are other volitional, intentional acts that need to be found in the context of engagement. So again, question of engagement different than the question of insurrection. I'm not sure.
You're saying basically, like, if a peaceful protester shows up to a riot, they're not committing an insurrection?
So the answer to that is yes, they're not necessarily. So now, don't get confused. There can be engagement that is the engagement itself isn't you doing anything violent, okay? There can be engagement where the person who is engaging is not themselves committing violence. But yes, I will grant.
But you're like letting them through the doors at the Capitol.
Right, that could be considered engaging in insurrection. But not everyone who was at January 6th engaged in insurrection, and not everyone who entered the Capitol engaged in insurrection. But the thing is, we're getting bogged down a little bit because this is once again going to get into the legal test of insurrection. And I will grant you that there have been at least some insurrections, definitional insurrections under the Graeber test, which I'll put the full definition in a second just for completeness. Yeah. There have been some definitional insurrections that have occurred with respect to the ICE protest. No doubt about that. That's my position. And it is not contradictory with Jan 6 being an insurrection or us considering Jan 6 worse than the ICE stuff. Because, of course, just like murders, some murders can be less bad than others. Some political assassinations can be better or worse than others. And so there's no contradiction there. We're just analyzing whether something meets a legal test. But I'll give you the Graeber definition, which is the one that I gave Destiny, which is what he used.
Let's test that. Let's just test that. The contradiction, if there is a contradiction.
Yeah.
What was the element I was missing? What was the from Destiny's definition?
So you said some sort of government process.
I said I can repeat it. So any group that intentionally and violently interferes or impedes on a federal government proceeding. I don't even know if he said violently, but we'll
So proceeding is too narrow. So that's number one. So you're wrong on
I
proceeding.
would probably agree with that, but that's his definition. So do you have a different definition?
Well, no,
Do you
I don't
wanna
think you're,
submit a different
I don't
definition?
think that you're
Well-
properly. Now, a proceeding could be a type of insurrection to interfere with a proceeding, but it's not the definition itself. It's a type of thing that would.
I'm
it's-
just explaining his definition. I'm just explaining his.
His definition is the definition I gave him. It's the Mark Graber definition, which Mark Graber, the professor
Then
of
why
law,
do you have a problem with it? Why do you have a
because
problem
you're
with
not
your own definition?
you're not stating it correctly. Was that not clear?
No, that was not clear.
Okay, so when you said government proceeding, and I said that's too narrow. What I'm saying there is it's too narrow in virtue of the actual definition. The actual definition isn't just for proceedings. Proceedings are gatherings of lawmakers and administrators. That's the test for instruction is broader. It's not just for proceedings. It's for other stuff too. So that is me taking
And I
issue
just
with
want
your.
to know what it is. I just
Yeah.
want to know what the definition is.
No, wait, hang on. No, I was going that, and you said I want you to tell me how my definition wasn't the correct one. And so when I was going at your definition, do you not remember we just had this back and forth? I was going to give you the full Graber, and you're like, well, I want to know how
what
mine is
the
different.
Missing element. I'm just waiting on what
well,
was the missing element.
So one of the elements you have is misstated. It's not that the element is missing, it's just the wrong element. So that's the first thing I'm doing is showing you parts of your definition that you provided that are wrong, by which I mean they're not part of the Mark Graber definition.
So that would mean this isn't Destiny's definition, is what you're saying. And I'm just using his because that's the last debate I had with one of you guys. But if you have a different one, that's fine.
Destiny might have stated a proceeding in one of his formulations of it, but I'm telling you that where he got that definition from ultimately is from Mark Graber, because that's the one I gave to him. And that one, if he said a proceeding, he might have said it as, because a proceeding is a type of thing that could be, I'll tell you what it is.
He said that is the definition. He said that is the definition.
I'm telling you, his distillation, his formulation of that, again, I'm assuming that you're represented it correctly. That could be on his part, just saying something quickly that matches Jan 6, a subset of the actual element, which is resisting of a federal law, of any federal law. And that is not just government proceedings. That can involve situations in the total absence of government employees or with only one government employee.
So can you break it down in totality then? Because I just want to hear it all together.
All right. So it's an assemblage. That's number one. And it's not just a group, right? So a group can exist behind the scenes and not a public assemblage. An assemblage, all right? Not a group, not just a group. Who, for a public purpose, all right? That's an additional component, a motive, a public motive. And people can disagree what is private, what is absolutely private, what is more public. We can get into that. So an assemblage for a public purpose. I don't think that your definition that you just gave there included public purpose. You said violently. You said violently. That's too narrow. Through force or intimidation. Intimidation.
Yeah. No,
okay.
That's fine with me. That supports my argument.
Resist any federal law, well, at least with respect to a federal insurrection. If there are insurrections also against state governments, which could include state laws. Okay, that's the definition of Mark Graber.
Yeah,
and the reason it's the definition.
Wait, but doesn't that apply? How is that?
It does apply in some cases. In some cases, but not everywhere.
How does that not apply to federal law enforcement? Resisting federal law enforcement in conducting a federal government proceeding, which is deportations.
It depends on. Yeah. I'm telling you, it depends on what incident you're talking about.
We're talking about Renee Good. We're talking about this scenario.
Okay, so in the context of Renee Good, there could be many different missing elements, and I'll tell you what those are. So, but just to be clear, just because I grant that there's some definitional insurrections that have occurred with respect to ICE, doesn't mean every ICE encounter in which someone is arrested or killed represents an insurrection. Do you understand that?
Sorry. So I'll amend that. Okay. I don't mean that every ICE, every riot on ICE and federal law enforcement is an insurrection. But this situation is, the Renee Good situation is.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm having trouble with it.
So Renee Good, one of the there's many reasons why her situation, she's not an insurrectionist under at least the video that we've seen so far. To the extent that she's using force or intimidation at all, And, you know, there's some questions about whether she ever applied force. I don't think that she ever, I don't think there's good evidence to suggest that, it ever hit the person. She was intending a very private purpose.
But you excluded violence from your
or threat.
definition just now.
Threats are intentional, and the use of force under the Graeber test needs to be intentional.
You don't think driving your car at someone is intimidation or a threat of violence?
To intend to intimidate, you need to intend, by which we mean it's your conscious object to put someone in fear of harm, of bodily injury. That's what it means to intend to intimidate, right? If you just walk, so I'll give you an example. If you're like a jacked guy and you're just walking down the street and some like very frightened person just like runs away from you, you agree, you haven't intimidated them, right? Now, in normal common language,
it surrounds what you believe, which was our last conversation. It's important what people believe, and it's very hard to prove what people believe, and it's very hard to prove intentionality. So I feel like you're kind of focusing on the one area that's really hard to prove, which is her intending to cause harm.
Well, no. Yeah. I don't think you're understanding exactly where I was going. I'm saying I think that the purpose of what she was doing, by at least as we look back, she was trying to evade law enforcement, and that's a very private purpose. That is not a public purpose. To the extent that she was using force at all or intending to intimidate, I was saying to the extent, by which I mean even assume she was, it wasn't for a public purpose. It was to get away.
So I don't think I understand this full definition. Then I don't understand this full.
What about it? Don't you understand?
Like, are we focusing on the intimidation or the fact that she was impeding on federal law enforcement? Because those seem like two different things. And I might be able to. What's the word? Why am I blanking? Concede your last point, but she's also just still, by blocking her car in the middle of the road.
Well, I'm just going to what you want to talk about. I thought you had said, well, I want to know why she isn't an insurrection under Destiny's test, or under the Graeber, or under your test, Pisco. And that's why I was going into the nitty gritty of the requirements and the elements of the insurrection.
So you're saying it has to be intimidation. It's not just impeding or interfering with the federal government proceeding.
You need to use force or intimidation. So a crime. Well, insurrection is a crime. Okay, so let's get even broader and more. Okay, what is insurrection? Insurrection is a type of treason. Insurrection is levying war against the United States or against any government. Levying war, and the definition of levying war for insurrection is what I described. And what I described.
This is a new definition now.
No, it's the same. I'm telling you the same.
It means war.
No, that's not what I said.
It must mean war.
I'm telling you that how Mark Graeber gets the definition of insurrection is he goes to references of the word insurrection in legal proceedings in America, right? This word had a meaning, right? People understood what this word meant when they made laws about insurrection. They weren't just like, oh, let's just use a random word like frindle, all right? So there was a meaning of the word. And so Graeber's like, oh, I'm going to do the work to actually decipher the meaning of this term insurrection. So what do? Let me go through all of these old court documents. Let me go through all of these old papers. Let me look at these chief justices to say what they said about insurrection. Oh, what do they say? Well, they say that anyone who levies war against the United States has committed treason and it's done an insurrection. Oh, levying war. Well, the Constitution defines levying war as one of two types of treason: levying war and giving aid or comfort to the enemies of the United States, which is more foreign facing. It's about like betraying your country to another country. But levying war is the other type of treason. And so Graeber says, okay, so here the charge for insurrection, the elements are levying war. Saying, so that's how we. So I'm not trying to.
We're getting into the business of interpretation, though. Now, in the purpose of words, the purpose of a definition is to narrow the meaning to a very specific set of things.
That's what the Graeber definition does.
So we don't need to interpret beyond that.
I don't know what you mean by we don't need to interpret it. I agree we need to apply it, but application involves interpretation.
All right, hold on,
Yeah.
Go ahead. I can hear you.
All right. So I zoomed out to just give you a sense of what this thing is called engagement in insurrection. And engagement in insurrection is a crime. It's a form of treason, and it's called levying war. And levying war, which is insurrection, they're equivalent, right? Which is a subset of treason, is a crime that requires you to prove certain elements. Crimes have elements. You need to prove each of the elements, right? Beyond a reasonable doubt. So for these crimes, you need to prove elements beyond a reasonable doubt. Well, what are the elements? I went through them. 4, assemblage using force or intimidation for a public purpose to resist any federal law or any law. Okay? Those are the 4 elements. 4. Yeah. Now, in modern criminal interpretation, we have this thing called the Model Penal Code, and we have these old Latin terms called, have you heard of mens rea, actus reus? These are Latin terms. And okay, so mens rea is a kind of mental state about it. And in addition to that, we have these things called attendant circumstances to crimes. So the actus reus of the action that's bad, because usually we don't just have thought crimes, all right? Usually we don't have thought crimes. So you can have whatever bad thoughts you want, except in certain cases like conspiracy, there's no such thing as a thought crime. There needs to be some kind of act, some kind of volitional thing you're doing for it to be a crime. So in the case of insurrection, what is it the thing that you're doing? Well, an insurrection is using force or intimidation. That's the actus reus, right? Now, engagement's a little separate. This is just kind of more of the definition. It's to help you understand the insurrection part of it. Engagement will be a little bit different, but that's like the thing that's happening. And if you don't have force or intimidation, you don't have an insurrection, okay? So I was, in going through the Renee Good example, I was saying, let's assume that she applied force to this officer or intentionally tried to intimidate the officer. Keep in mind.
No. Like I'm saying the force applies here too. The force applies to Renee Good. Applying force, you're applying force with your vehicle if you're driving away and it looks like you're driving into him, whether or not you intended to hit him, you're applying force.
Yeah, so I understand. And that's why I said, assume that she either hit him or was trying to intimidate him. Did you hear me when I said that? Let's assume. I doubt.
No, I'm not going to remember everything that you said.
Okay. I'm just saying, I doubt. I don't have a good reason to believe that she hit the officer. I think the officer put his hand on the car and at most perhaps was dragged by the car while he was on the top of it for like a very short amount of time. But I don't think that she did any kind of volitional act that caused something to hit him. But I'm saying, let's just assume that she did. Assume that she either did hit him or, for whatever reason, suffices the intimidation portion. No doubt she was probably trying to resist the law. That is to say, the resistance of the, whatever. There's some question about that actually, right? Whether or not the resistance has to be is tailored towards a specific place, or is just like a mere sort of wrapped up in the criminal act that she's doing. In other words, is trying to flee, is doing a crime, resisting a federal law in and of itself. I think less clear on that, but let's just assume that she is fleeing for the purpose of resisting the fleeing statutes.
I'm not saying she's just doing a crime. I'm not saying she's just doing a crime. I'm saying she's resisting the federal law enforcement, the enacting in the conduction
Which law
of the federal law enforcement.
Which law?
It doesn't have to be law specific.
No. The definition. The definition of insurrection is resist the law. What's the law?
Oh, okay. I thought we were working with Destiny's definition, which is a federal government proceeding.
I'm using the definition that I don't know why I would use Destiny's definition, except to the extent it's the one that I gave him that I use.
You don't. It's just the one I submitted. You don't have to.
Well, then this trivially wouldn't be an insurrection because this is not a proceeding, correct? If we're going by that view, which I think is probably uncharitable to Destiny, if I'm being honest.
How is this not a proceeding? How is this not a federal government proceeding?
A proceeding involves some sort of like scheduled and ordered like body congregating to consider some action. A federal, that's usually what is meant by proceeding.
Or to enact action, or to this is the law. This is the law.
So do you think that when like
you can't be in this country?
So when a cop pulls you over for speeding, you think that's like a proceeding?
No.
And so in the main run,
this is deportations. Deportations are the proceeding.
No, an immigration
federal law
proceeding.
enforcement.
Yeah,
This is the process.
there are
This is a
immigration
part of the
proceedings.
process.
There are immigration proceedings, but an arrest is not a proceeding.
Okay.
Agreed?
My phone's dying.
Do you have a charger?
But yeah, I do. I can call back in or something, but I'll give some other people a chance. But the last thing I wanted to say is Destiny admitted that the violent LA ICE riots were insurrections.
Some of them were.
Yeah, so I just don't see how that's meaningfully distinct or meaningfully significant
From
when
what?
we compare it to Renee Good, where
Because
they're actually she's involved with a federal law enforcement officer. They weren't even involved ramming federal law enforcement officers. The violent anti-ICE riots that he's
I think
claiming
that
he admitted are insurrections. They were just burning vehicles, right? So this Renee Good is worse using Destiny's definition, which again we don't have to use.
worse in what respect?
Because in the LA ICE riots, it was mostly burning vehicles and traffic stops. In the Renee Good situation, has her vehicle, which is a weapon of force that she's driving into a federal law enforcement.
Yeah, but you're just missing the other needed elements of insurrection and engagement with it. So the other needed in the case of burning vehicles and destroying people or obstructing people or threatening them, right? In those cases, it could be very obvious that there's a public purpose with respect to a unity, right? There's a unity between the qualifying actus reus and the resistance mens rea and the public purpose mens rea that is just not present in the Renee Good situation, as well as like it's kind of like not part of the assemblage what's going on with her car situation. It really does seem more private. She's trying to elude arrests. That's what's going on. And it just doesn't seem on all fours. Even if there's like less violence technically than other situations, you're just ignoring the other elements of insurrection.
Yeah.
And also painting with a broad brush, just because some things in LA meet the definitional test of insurrection doesn't mean they all do.
Okay, well, I don't understand the legal model you were trying to propose. So
what about it? Don't you
I think I'll
understand?
just leave it there.
What don't you understand about it?
Oh, I just didn't understand it in general.
You don't understand that a crime has elements, and these elements, or any kind of legal thing, right? In order to be this, you need this, this, and this, and this, right? And you need all of them. That's what the Graybird definition. That's what him doing the historical analysis says. Is for something to be this, you need to have A, B, C, D. Okay, and we look around, we say, okay, there's A, there's an assemblage. Okay, there's B, they're using force or intimidation. Okay, there's C, there's a public purpose, and D, they're trying to resist the execution of a law. All right, we have an insurrection. There you go. That's how it is. It's not complicated. It's not rocket science.
That makes sense when you're just applying it to the definition. But I thought you were saying like, oh, we gotta interpret. Now we have to interpret the definition and create more sub definitions by looking at history.
No, I was trying to
looking at previous insurrections.
I was trying to give you some.
I don't even think that's necessary. I don't think it's necessary.
It's not necessary for me to talk about the historical how Graeber did it. I was just trying to give you some useful context about like what we're doing here. What we're doing here is we're trying to decipher what these people meant by this word, and it seems clear that what they meant by this word back when they were using the word is a set of things, and that these things derive from other things. And so what I was trying to show you is that Destiny's not pulling this out of whole cloth. It's not Destiny's definition. It's us citing legal scholars who've done the work to construct this model, or not really a model, just more of like a observing what was required to make this finding back in the 1800s.
Okay, so real quick, would you say that the founding fathers' intention and meaning for America is more important than the Constitution, than the words they wrote?
Important in what sense?
Like, shouldn't we define what America is based off of the founding fathers' vision under your principle, rather than the Constitution? So now
No.
we have to interpret what the founding fathers meant for America and apply that to our current context, right?
It's kind of like hard to disentangle because the founding fathers'
Like
desires.
the words don't matter all that much.
The founding
right?
hang on a second. So the founding fathers' views sort of inform what the Constitution is, and so it's hard to disentangle in that sense. So I don't say the founding fathers are like irrelevant, but at the end of the day, I'll answer it. The Constitution is more important, if for anything, right? The Constitution incorporates some, though not all, of what the framers thought about different things. It was a compromise, and the framers, of course, had different beliefs about different things and different values, and so they didn't agree on everything. So the Constitution represents the unity of the disagreements and the compromise that was reached, and it's been updated many times since its founding, and so given that, the Constitution is more important. It represents the compromise vision of the framers, not isolated cherry-picked ones. It incorporates that and other stuff that is relevant for our society and our definition.
So do you think the Constitution captured all of the founding fathers' vision for America?
No.
Encapsulated it?
No.
Okay, so I'm just pointing out how we need to look at the words. If we're saying words matter, then the Constitution matters the most. And then the objective definition of insurrection matters most. And we don't need this extra layer of how the definition was used or what they meant when they created the definition. We don't need that element anymore.
Well, no.
Or else we would need the founding fathers' vision. We would need the founding fathers' vision.
So first of all, the framers' vision, feeds into this term insurrection. I'll give you examples, right? One of the first things that that people look to in terms of the definition of insurrection is Shays Rebellion. Have you heard of Shays Rebellion or Shays Insurrection?
I've heard of it.
Okay, so this is from the 17. This showed that the Articles of Confederation were weak. That was highly influential to the framers. Then in the presidency of George Washington, he's one of the framers. The Constitution was sort of modeled on a Washingtonian vision of the United States. He dealt with the whiskey insurrection. John Adams had elaborations on insurrections. I think even Aaron Burr was charged with either insurrection or treason or one of those things. So it's just not the case that Graeber's history is irrelevant with respect to the framers. Much of the framers' intent is captured in the interpretive philosophy.
You just said it wasn't all captured, but you just admitted it wasn't all captured there.
No, not every value of the framers is captured in the Constitution itself. By the way, the evidence of that is the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was an afterthought, and a lot of framers wanted the Bill of Rights, but the Bill of Rights did not exist at the time the Constitution was in force until shortly after, where they ratified it across the country. And so, of course, the Constitution was a compromise. It was not a complete distillation of all their views, and we still had this underground disagreement about slavery, on which, so the framers, you can't just view the framers as a singular. The framers are multiple viewpoints from very different people from different backgrounds all across the country. And so it is a misnomer.
That's why the Constitution is important, right? Like you're saying, that's why the Constitution is important, because it consolidates that into one vision, words on paper, a definition, right?
Yeah, well,
and I'm saying the same thing. We just need to use the words, and we can interpret it however we want.
I know, but the words,
to apply the words.
The words existed in a context. You cannot hermetically seal them from what was happening at the time, right? So, for example, I'll give you an example, right? What does it mean to say that there shall be no unreasonable searches or seizures? What does that mean? What does it mean to say that Congress shall not abridge the freedom of speech? If you don't understand what the framers were talking about, right? The words don't self-explain themselves to modern sensibilities. This is an old document. It's a short document. And a lot of the times they were using pre-existing frameworks, the English common law, for example. They don't explain themselves, and you need to go digging to see what the fuck they're talking about.
But why would we trust, I don't know, the English common law over their intention, I guess? Which rule are we using? Do the words matter more, or does the intention of the people who wrote it matter more?
So
which one matters
the
more?
word. So people have different judicial philosophy. The words matter, but the words don't exist outside of a context, and how the words were understood, because remember, what was the Constitution ratification thing, this whole thing in Philadelphia?
What do you mean the words don't exist outside of a context? What do you mean by that?
That it is incorrect, by which we mean inaccurate, by which we mean not good. It's inadvisable to read the words outside of the context of when they were developed. I'll give you an example of this, right? If you were to just open up a Bible and just read it independent of what you knew about the context of the Middle East, the context of the Canaanites and the different relationship as between the peoples that are being referenced, you might be led to like wrong conclusions. Similarly, right? People will say the King James Bible is not an accurate like translation of the New Testament because it takes these liberties or it's incorrect reading of this or that. And so people will oftentimes have to like either correct certain translations or give different views on this, and trying to divorce the text from the context in which it was written is a difficult process. So the answer is the words matter. The original public meaning of the words matter if that's your style of philosophy, and that seems to be like the what's in vogue. But that can't be divorced from what the intentions of the framers were, as best we can understand them with respect to the words they chose.
I'm actually in favor of interpreting the framers' vision for America, for defining what America should be.
How do you decipher that?
You'd have to research the people and the decisions they make at that snapshot in time, but at least it's consistent. At least it's consistent. Like they only had one vision, right? They only had.
No, they had very different visions.
Each of them only had one vision.
Sometimes they were contradictory. Jefferson, for example, Madison, these people had very contradictory visions. On the one hand, Jefferson says, slavery is wrong, but he holds slaves, and then later on he bans the importation of slavery, but like definitely doesn't ban it. Madison, originally he supports the Constitution, but then he becomes, he and Jefferson found this Republican Party that in seemingly contradiction to a lot of the values that he tried to promote when he was merely trying to help write the Constitution, etc. So these people have contradiction. They're human beings. Washington himself, right? He's a man of many flaws. He's an arrogant person. In some ways, he's like larger than life in terms of generosity and in terms of like feeling this honor. But he also like really, really hated when people talk shit. And so I don't think like these are human beings that had contradictions in their minds. Their visions weren't like this one thing. They're just like us. They're humans.
It's hard to do, but I think it would get at a better and truer sense of what America should be from the people who created it. So that's my position. It sounds like coming from a legal position, you're going to value the Constitution more. That's fine.
Well, no, I think the Constitution is an elaboration.
You're using in our definition with Renee Good. That's where I'm identifying the hypocrisy.
No, I don't think that there's a hypocrisy at all. First of all, if I profess to care more about the Constitution as an elaboration of framers' intent than any specific framers' cohesive vision, whatever that is, that's not a contradiction because I'm telling you up front that that's the view or the preference matrix that I have. And so there's no internal contradiction there. But separate and apart from that, I just view like these framers, some of them fucking hated each other. Have you seen Hamilton the play? Like Hamilton and Jefferson were huge enemies. Like Aaron Burr killed Hamilton. And these are two parts of different parties who initially were in favor, at least Madison and Hamilton. They were two of the writers of the Federalist Papers. Washington hated the quarreling between his cabinet. It drove him insane, to say nothing of how Adams viewed and the rivalry between Jefferson and Adams. Like it is just ahistorical to view the framers as having some shared sets, a shared vision in one. And to the extent that they have one, the best way to just cohere them is to look at the document they actually ratified, and that everyone at a bare minimum agreed on this. Now, what's key? They agreed on the words. They didn't necessarily agree on the interpretation. One of the first big constitutional disagreements that happens is when John Adams passes as president the Sedition Act, which Madison and Jefferson say, that's so unconstitutional. That's so unconstitutional. How can you make it a crime to criticize the president, which is essentially one of the things that the Sedition Act did? So there was massive disagreements. There was disagreements on the constitutionality of the First National Bank of the United States. And so Yeah, they agreed on the words, and we have to do our best to interpret them. But oftentimes there's no like objective answer here.
But do the words matter more than our interpretation of it? Because that seems subject to a lot more bias and corruption for us to interpret it however it favors us than to just take the specific meaning of the words.
We have to do a reasonable job at trying to interpret it. Unfortunately, and this is the problem with a lot of these Christian nationalist pseudo-intellectuals who do this kind of presuppositional bullshit that just kind of fry your brain on nonsense. What they will do is they'll say, oh, their only right thing is like the Bible and God, but all of this is being funneled and interpreted. And an interpretation necessarily involves a human interface between words on paper and the concepts that the listener will hear, or indeed the speaker will mean. And so interpretation is necessary. It's impossible not to interpret when you read something. It really is impossible not to interpret as a human being. And I think the mistake is thinking that interpretation is something that like we can't do.
Things, like some words are more objective than others. And
I don't know what that means to say a word is more objective. I actually don't know what you mean when you say a word is more objective.
As in, it can only have like a singular meaning, and you can't really.
I would say that there's less reasonable interpretations of certain words. Less, yeah. But yeah. That I just want to be clear about that. Like, yes. So, for example, the number two, the number two is susceptible not to many other meanings than the number two, and yeah. It's kind of hard to further define the number two as 1 + 1. Like it. So there are certain words which seem more narrow, but again, like a lot of words have multiple meanings, and there's like words themselves don't have objective meaning. Words are references to concepts.
Okay, sure. But then I'll just say where there can only be like one singular reasonable interpretation of it.
Yeah, like that's going to be tough with the Constitution sometimes.
What I'm using to say objective is.
Where there's one reasonable interpretation. Okay, then if that's what you mean by objective, then I can grant that there are some things that seem to have more objective meaning in that sense.
Yeah, okay.
Hey, man.
It was a good conversation.
Yeah.
I don't know where to go, but yeah, I respect it.
At some point, we should actually talk about the Renee Good, whether it's murder or not. But I understand that you may have a...
That was my initial position. My initial position was, I think it's a tragedy, of course. And I thought it was an overextension of force by federal law enforcement. And the one area where I will concede is that I don't think he needed to shoot her in the face. You know, it's like, he definitely didn't need to do that. He could have just gone out of the way, you know. So I think that's still my current position, but it was a good conversation. Yeah. And I think it's kind of a toss-up. And I wanted to shed light on this insurrection thing. And,
yeah, sure. Listen,
he admitted that the LA riots or the violent
some of them, not all of them.
Yeah,
right?
That's your opinion, but I'm just going off of what he admitted.
You think Destiny admitted that all the LA anti-ICE protests were insurrections?
He said that vaguely. If he meant something else, he should have used different words.
Okay, maybe he did. I doubt.
And if people mean something else with the insurrection definition, they should use different words.
Okay, maybe he did. I doubt he means it, but if he did say that, that was a mistake.
All good.
But I will say, let's keep the conversation going. Do you have a channel or something that people can reach you out on, or Twitter? Do you want them to follow
TikTok? Yeah, I got TikTok, mostly Peaceful Polynesian on TikTok. I'm starting to upload content there, and I'll be launching my channel very shortly on YouTube. But we'll keep an open mind.
100%, and happy to chat anytime you want, and appreciate your opinions. Okay.
All right, peace out.
Later, brother. Okay. Oh wait, I have to destroy the Zoom too. One sec. Alrighty. Cool beans, everybody. Hope you all enjoy part of that conversation. I think that there were some communication hang-ups there. Might be my fault. I might not be on my game. I'm trying to do my I just saw Hutch tweet that. That's so funny. I'm trying to do my best to follow him there, and there you can kind of see sometimes my frustration with certain conversations, in that I am really trying to respect what the other side is saying and go down those trains and not like lose sight of the initial point. But honestly, maybe just like going with the flow and just being like, but especially on like the issues of the election fraud stuff, those are areas where like I don't want to let go, and I just want to like make sure my position is elaborated. And so maybe you guys can understand, if you want to argue, well, that's him. I don't think that he was probably, I'm not saying that he was obsessed with Destiny, but I'm not sure it's likely that Destiny would say that all the LA protests were insurrections, and if he did say like preceding thing, my guess is he meant that as like an example of a thing that could be an insurrection, as opposed to the definition of insurrection, meaning you must have a preceding. I doubt he would say that, but maybe, right? Because by that logic, the attack on Fort Sumter wouldn't be an insurrection. And of course, I'm pretty sure Steven thinks that it would be. Okay, where were we? So we had the exact same convo, almost word for word, like an hour before the stream on Twitter. I was breaking my brain. How similar? Yeah, really? Yeah, and also because I'm in like an unfortunate position where I can't really like fact check him on the wording / also why, right? Because why should I, if it's true that like he's accurately representing what was said, it's not really interesting to me. Like, talk to me, right? But I do appreciate him coming on. I think it's interesting to get into the mind sometimes of people who see the world so differently, but you know, it is a massive gulf in how we view the epistemic question of the reasonability of the person who wants to claim the election was stolen in 2020. That's a massive, massive gulf. But what can you do? What can you do? I didn't watch the Davos stuff, but maybe I should at some point. I do want to go through some shit before we get into, and it's going to start with Epstein, actually, because I forgot that was the thing I wanted to do yesterday, but it's actually pretty hilarious / concerning / the tactics and strategy of Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie on full display. Mark Carney owned. Very interesting. I want to remind you guys tomorrow at 9:30 in the morning, talking to Counterpoints about Renee Good, more stuff, and about my position and his representation of it. And then at 1 p.m. Eastern, talking to Richard Hanania, this Sunday conversation with the Vanguard. All right. So before we get into SCOTUS stuff, which is interesting, look at this. So Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie are trying to fight the good fight. They're trying to get the Epstein files fully released according to the law that they passed and sponsored. But the administration, we're now, more than a month from the deadline? It's been weeks. And to put it mildly, the production has not satisfied. Has not satisfied. And so they were kind of angling to have different tools at their disposal, perhaps to use to get some enforcement from the administration. But I want you to take a more realist sense of what Ro Khanna and of what Thomas Massie are doing here. I don't think they think they'll be successful. Or at a bare minimum, I don't think that they have a good chance to be successful. I think that Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna are trying to continue their political and optics and PR strategy of being the people pushing for this Epstein fight and of needling Trump on his inadequacies on the fact pattern and his position with respect to the Epstein Files Transparency Act. And I think in that light, this filing makes more sense. And this order initially, we'll go through the order and the dueling letters. I want you to put on your realist hat. I don't want you to just think of this in terms of the discrete legal formalistic issues before you. I want you to really think about this as a political operative. Imagine that you're Ro Khanna's advisor or you're Thomas Massey's advisor or whatever, right? I want you to think about this, okay? And as you do, consider whether you think Trump's arguments are better, and they might be. I might be siding, in fact, I think I likely will, with the Department of Justice in this back and forth. So what would you expect Ro Khanna and Thomas Massey to do when the government is not following the law? Well, you might expect them to file a lawsuit of their own. But that's not what they did, is it? They didn't do that. Instead, they said, we have a perfectly good lawsuit right here. Now I say lawsuit. What is this? Is this a traditional lawsuit? This is not a traditional lawsuit. This is a criminal case. Not a civil lawsuit. It's a criminal case, prosecution. And look at what Judge Engelmeyer, that name might be familiar to some people. On the evening of January 12th, the court received by email a motion, memorandum of law, and one exhibit from counsel representing U.S. Representatives Ro Khanna and Thomas Massey. So these guys decided, and again, I want you to think about this as a political strategist. I want you to think about this from the PR perspective. These guys email Chambers, okay? The representatives seek to participate as amici curiae in this manner. The representatives who co-sponsored the Epstein Files Transparency Act allege that the DOJ has failed in multiple respects to comply with the requirements of that act. They asked the court, inter alia, among other things, to appoint a special master to facilitate DOJ's compliance with the act. Counsel for the government and defendant Ghislaine Maxwell were copied on the email attaching these submissions. Weird, right? So we're going to use this criminal case to advocate for the court in the exercise of its jurisdiction over this criminal case, which yielded a conviction, and which was later, there was additional filings related to like grand jury materials. We're going to use this case, we're going to email as proposed amici to try to get compliance using a special master on the Epstein Files Transparency Act. A lot of interesting questions that raises. But this is an order, and what does the order say? To assure public access to these filings, the court directs the law firm to file above materials on the public docket on this case no later than 1 today. They're like, why'd you email this shit? Put it on the public docket. The representatives' counsels are directed to file notices of appearance on the docket by the same deadline. So they're saying, you emailed us, bro. We're ordering you to file this on the public docket. And not only that, your attorneys need to enter notices of appearance. The court also directs the government to respond by letter publicly filed on the docket. Now, why do you think the court might be a little bit irritated as to the conduct of Massey and Khanna, putting aside the issue of the email? Normal process. Yeah, but not just that, right? We're talking about the Epstein case. And this judge specifically, as well as other judges, the administration is already trying to use them as a scapegoat for why they withheld grand jury materials. Obviously laughable, obviously stupid, right? That was stupid. That was dumb. We can be honest about that now, folks. And so having like I know these aren't like ex-party communications. Both counsels were CC'd and shit. But having email correspondence with a judge and the parties outside of the public dockets, the courts do not want to be held responsible here. I'm not saying I know that that's what's going on, but like I can imagine the annoyance, not just at not filing this on the public docket, but just like, oh my God, the judge was emailing and the judge secretly denied. Right? Maybe Ro Khanna then can make a hay out of it. And so this bolding maybe indicates some like frustration, perhaps. Because Ro Khanna, we tried to enter the thing and they told us no. They told us we couldn't do it. The government's response should address the issues implicated in Representative's motion. This is Ro Khanna and Massey. These include, but need not be limited to, whether the representatives have standing to participate in this criminal case, including to raise issues of compliance with the act that have not been raised in this matter by any party or the victim. Whether this court, by virtue of its supervision of the protective order in this case or otherwise, has the authority to rule upon or take action to bring about DOJ's compliance with the act. The government's response is due Friday, and Ghislaine is also due Friday. If they want to reply, reps go January 20th. What does this tell you? This tells you the court already, I think, is leaning in a particular direction. Even putting this out into writing to me kind of shows the self-defeating nature of what Ro Khanna and Massey are trying to do here. Namely, there's a initial question of like, why the fuck do you two bozos get to decide whether the DOJ complies and whether the courts are able to adjudicate the DOJ's compliance with the act? You're just two guys. You're just two co-sponsors. And then second, how do we have the authority, right? They both kind of implicate the court's authority in the sense of, from a federal standing perspective, this is an Article 3 standing. You need to show a case or controversy. Well, how do Ro Khanna and Thomas Massey, as individual members of a chamber, how do they raise a particularized injury to themselves? Maybe Congress, as a body, might have injury. But these two as individuals, unclear. And the additional language here, this is the part that shows where they're indicated that they have not been raised by other people, right? You've come into a criminal case which isn't about compliance with the act. And compliance with the act has not been raised either by the government or by Maxwell. And the interesting state of affairs here is Maxwell and the US are probably aligned that they don't want to use this docket as a way to litigate compliance. So on the one hand, you're like, this seems doomed. Why the hell would Ro Khanna and Thomas Massey do this? Well, I have a vision and view, and it's kind of similar to how I view the act itself in some capacity. That this is a little bit of theater. Actually, quite a lot of bit of theater. Because what's the harm? Thomas Massey and Ro Khanna get to try and lose. And Trump looks bad for trying to not comply. However, I think that this is not a good use of the court's time. I think this is using the court for theater. And so maybe we might have an opinion about whether or not under the standard that I enunciated, the social benefits outweigh the improper purpose of this amici filing. So let's see the government's response. This is from the DOJ. Dear Judge Engelmeyer, this is a criminal case with two parties, the government and the defendant, Ghislaine Maxwell, that is long since over, right? There's a conviction here. And the Supreme Court denied cert. Accordingly, there are only two issues currently pending: resolution of the collateral challenge to her conviction and sentence, and this court's supervision and enforcement and or modification of a protective order that Judge Nathan issued 2 years with respect to discovery materials the government provided to Maxwell. With regard to the latter, the court modified the protective order to permit the government to release publicly certain materials covered by the protective order, subject to limitations, so the government could comply with the Epstein Files Transparency Act. However, because the issue before this court was the scope of that protective order, as opposed to the government's obligations under the Act, the court did not, and respectively should not, mandate such disclosures. So the official position of the DOJ is the courts should not force us to disclose. That we'll disclose on our own. You'll give us permission to disclose, but you don't need to force us. We'll do it on our own time, thanks. Despite the narrow scope of the live issues before this court, Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie now seek to use this criminal case, to which they are not parties, true, to enforce the provisions of the Act, which was passed after the Supreme Court denied the petition for a writ of cert, thus rendering judgment final, by seeking relief in the form of oversight of the DOJ's compliance with the Act, which relief or cause of action are not provided for in any statute. And there we have it. What have Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie achieved? By doing this little maneuver. And this was predictable, by the way, but we have it in writing. Does anyone have a guess? The government is now on the record that their position is that the Epstein Files Transparency Act does not provide oversight. That is to say, the relief or cause of action, any relief or cause of action. In other words, if there is no cause of action, then no one can sue us to comply with the Act. Or at a bare minimum, that the Act does not provide a vehicle by which the DOJ can be sued. So as predicted, the DOJ is going to take the position, which is not an unreasonable position in some respects. And this was eminently foreseeable, that the law does not provide a remedy. And this, again, is a politically thorny issue for Trump. Because even if it were the case that there's nothing inculpatory in the Epstein files related to Trump or his affiliates, it will remain a live issue, and Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie can continue saying, can keep this alive forever. See, I don't know that it was poorly written. I'm starting to get more conspiratorial to think that the not having it be enforceable or not writing an explicit provision could have been a way to keep this a live issue as long as they need. And that is, if that's true, and I have spoken to Ro Khanna before, I wonder if I would ask this of him. I might, if I get the chance again. Did you consider writing in a cause of action into the Epstein transparency law? Because what can they do if the Supreme Court or some appellate court says, yeah, guys, you didn't write a cause of action in the law. That's your bad. What can Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie do? They can go back to the drawing board and take another bite of the apple. I don't know that that's what was going on in their minds. I can't prove it. But this was so foreseeable. So foreseeable. And we called it when we saw the legislation for the first time. There is no cause of action here. Right, an enforcement provision would look like inappropriate cases and violations of these duties. The Department of Justice may bring a civil action in a court of competent jurisdiction to do blah, 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 blah. And courts may render such orders as whatever, right? This exists. But the law doesn't contain it explicitly. And recently the courts have been like kind of loathed, by which I mean the Supreme Court, to interpret implied causes of action. They're kind of like disfavored. And I have to think these legislators know that. That's why I'm getting a little conspiratorial. And so I think if Trump is right here, and he might have the better of the arguments if I'm being honest, Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie get the benefit of looking like they're the ones continuing to champion transparency in opposition to Trump and the DOJ's recalcitrant attitude towards the release of more documents. Trump and the DOJ look like they're hiding stuff. And if worse comes to worse, they can get a second bite of the apple and say, all right, if the Supreme Court definitively rules no cause of action, we can go back to the drawing board. It keeps their options open, you know? Again, that's just my, someone says my tinfoil hat. Yeah, I think it might be true. I don't know it. I can't prove it. I have a hunch. Call it a hunch. And having no Article 3 standing, they do so by seeking leave to appear as amici curiae, right? And this is a good argument by Trump. The fact that they're coming to this court as amici proves they know they don't have standing. They know it. The court should exercise broad discretion to deny the appearance. Amici exist to provide the court with neutral assistance. Their function is not to raise new issues. Khanna and Massie's motion for leave runs afoul of all these rules. Seeking entry into a long-closed criminal case, the representatives explicitly try to create a new issue by moving the court to appoint a special master, an independent monitor, for the purpose of compelling the DOJ. The supposed need for this oversight is an issue that neither party has raised, nor could they, as the narrow issue before this court has been how the protective order can be modified to allow the government to proceed under the act, as opposed to enforcement of the act itself. Indeed, it is unclear how the act ever could have been an issue in this criminal case. Her judgment became final when the Supreme Court denied her petition for writ of certiorari. The act, which does not purport to offer relief to Maxwell from her conviction or sentence, was not even enacted until a month and a half later. There is no pending issue, much less one touching on the extraordinary relief sought by the representatives, with which amici could assist the court, right? The whole purpose is, you're supposed to help us. Why are you motioning for things? In short, Khanna and Massie, who propose moving to appoint a special master to compel productions of documents or to compel testimony, promise to exceed the well-defined role of amici. All right, this is not the role of amici to force like the courts to do stuff. Khanna and Massie do not seek merely to go well beyond the permissible bounds of an amicus. They do not even come as a friend of the court and provide the court with an objective, dispassionate, neutral discussion. Rather, they seek to vindicate their own particular interests and advance their vision of what it should look like. That is the Epstein Transparency Act. Courts routinely deny motions for leave in these circumstances, so too should this court. In light of the representative's motion, the court asked whether Khanna and Massey have Article 3 standing. Putting aside that this is clearly not the proper forum for the motion in the first place, the answer to both questions respectfully is no. So, understand the analytical distinctions here. Article 3 standing is a constitutional consideration, and it deprives the courts of even having the power to rule over it. If you don't have Article 3 standing, you're done, okay? But then separate is the authority to rule upon it in the specific case, right? Regardless, you might have Article 3 standing, but you can't raise it in this case. So they're different inquiries, whether you have Article 3 standing and whether this court, in this case, even assuming you did, can rule on it. Someone should be able to file a writ of mandamus. Massey against, again, that doesn't get rid of the Article 3 standing issue, in my opinion. Khanna and Massey lack standing. To have standing, a plaintiff must have an injury in fact, fairly traceable, redressable. These are, everyone knows the standard in the legal field. Most obviously absent here is an injury or an invasion of a legally protected interest that is concrete and particularized and actual or imminent, not conjectural or hypothetical. Khanna and Massey claim injury based on the DOJ's alleged noncompliance, but the Act does not provide any personal statutory right to seek information. The Act is unlike the Freedom of Information Act, which creates an individual right to obtain information. And even if the Act did confer such a right, Khanna and Massey do not demonstrate that this informational injury caused them any harm. To the extent that Khanna and Massey rely on their political offices, that they are the leads of the Act, individual members of Congress, asserting wholly abstract and wildly dispersed institutional injuries, do not have a sufficient personal stake and have not alleged a sufficiently concrete injury to have established Article 3 standards. And this is like a case you learn in law school, guys. This is like black letter standing doctrine. Rains v. Byrd. Accordingly, Khanna and Massey do not have standing to raise issues concerning with DOJ's compliance. I think I agree with this. In fact, I'm just going to go out and say it. I agree. SCOTUS has recognized a very narrow exception to this rule. As Raines explained in Coleman v. Miller, a state legislature was deadlocked regarding ratification of a federal constitutional amendment. Lieutenant Governor cast a deciding vote, and the state senators who voted against the amendment sought a writ of mandamus that would compel the appropriate state officials to recognize that the legislature had not, in fact, ratified the amendment. The Supreme Court held that legislators whose votes would have been sufficient to defeat or enact a specific legislative act have standing to sue if that legislative act goes into effect or does not, on the ground that their votes have been nullified, right? And that's more individualized to the specific representative. If you're alleging some issue with the law, but it pertains to your vote and whether it was counted, well, now you're kind of like alleging an individualized harm to your vote. So this, I think, this exception is real, but I don't think it applies in this case. And so I agree with the Trump DOJ that these people don't have standing, Khanna and Massey. Respectfully, the government submits that the court lacks the authority to enter the requested relief. When the Constitution or laws of the United States do not support a cause of action, the federal courts cannot give an award. The Act does not provide a cause of action. So this is, regardless of the constitutional Article 3 issue, the Act does not give a cause of action. Because the statute does not evince Congress's intent to create the private right of action asserted, this court may not create that action through judicial mandate. With no standing and no cause of action, the reps are unable to seek the relief that they request, and the court has not authority to issue it. In short, the protective order simply does not provide a basis for judicial oversight. So this is tells you the position. And if anything, Khanna and Massey have been able to unearth the strong version of Trump's DOJ's argument, which is not just that Massey and Khanna can't file a lawsuit, but that there is no cause of action available. Yeah, Jen, I happen to agree with you. I think that they knew that there wasn't a way to enforce it. That's why I'm like, the reason why there's kind of like two different things you can think. I think either you think that they wrote it bad, or you think that they were devious. Or you think that they were delusional. I'll tell you why. Delusional. Okay. I think that the wrote it bad shit is stupid. Because these are... Ro Khanna is not an idiot, all right? He's not a noob. And these people who wrote this law, they had lawyers look at it, all right? They know what a cause of action is. And they know that the law doesn't have one in it, written explicitly. And so in order to believe this, I have to believe that the sponsors and the caucuses who voted this in, and Schumer and Jeffries and all the different people who voted in this didn't think about this and said, hey, should we include a cause of action? No, no way, no how. All right. So I don't think wrote it bad is good. So we have devious or delusional. For delusional, I think that it's kind of what like Jen was saying, like, oh, they thought that they would just, Trump would just comply with the law. And for very similar reasons as wrote it bad, I don't buy it, right? Why don't I buy it? Well, everyone was saying, even if they write a law, they're not going to comply. No one had any, like, we were talking about this law and everyone was saying, well, even if you pass it, they're just not going to listen. You know? And the law created these devious exceptions that were like it was a very broad request for production in the law, but like very devious exceptions. So, and everyone was saying like, okay, well, if you pass a law, this was aired out. And actually people were talking about the law because it was proposed like months ago. So I don't buy this. I think that they knew that that Trump was likely to buck the law or use the exceptions that they wrote in the law in a way that would be unacceptable to the general public or themselves. I think they knew that. I didn't think that they thought like, all of a sudden Trump is going to care about the public and he's going to be forced to be very fair and judicious. We're talking about Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, as well as everyone else. So I take devious. They want to keep this a live issue, having the broad production as well as the exceptions and no cause of action maintains this as a live issue. I don't know. What do you guys think? Some other solution? They may not have wanted to over legislate. Well, then they wrote the wrong law. The law like asks for insane levels of production. So yeah, I don't think so. Maybe get Crystal to ask for you ASAP. Oh, makes sense, boss. You guys don't give a shit about what I'm saying, do you? Respectfully yours, Pam Bondi, Todd Blanche, and Jay Clayton. So we have the heads of the DOJ saying, no one can force us to comply with this law. It's up to us to comply with the law. That's the official DOJ position. All right. And the response. We write on behalf of our clients, Massie and Ro Khanna. We want leave to file this brief to appoint a special master. The government fundamentally misframes the congressman's requests. First, the government argues that the court should ignore the congressman's request because they lack standing or a private right of action, or that they supposedly have a personal interest in the outcome of the matter. However, these claims are merely straw men intended to avoid the actual issues at play here. The congressmen have no personal interest in the outcome of this matter, beyond a desire to see the lawful functioning of the government. In this way, the congressmen are acting in the purest sense of the phrase amici curiae. Amici curiae. People will pronounce it differently. Friends of the court, because they merely suggest the court should act on its own to ensure the proper functioning of the administration of justice. As sponsors of the act, they are able to inform this court as to the intent of the act, the harm it is intended to remedy through the mandated disclosure, and the ongoing harm being caused by the government's violation. The government next claims that neither this court nor any other court has the power or authority to mandate that it complies with the duly enacted law. That is true. They are right about that. That is simply incorrect. One of the most important roles that Article 3 judges have is the supervision of the lawyers before them and the administration of justice as a whole. That inherent power is broad and necessary to ensure that the people have faith in the workings of the criminal justice system. Further, this nation has long had a presumption in favor of public access to many documents because transparency breeds trust. Yikes. So you have no argument. So you guys have zero argument. I don't see how they're writing to a public audience with this shit. In apparent conflict with its argument that no court can enforce the act, the government has publicly blamed the court for its failure to comply with the act. No citation. Now, I know what he's talking about, but that was on the grand jury stuff. The government is proverbially speaking out of both sides of its mouth, and in doing so is attempting to use this court in a manner that brings shame and disgrace to the vaunted criminal justice system in this court. See, this letter sounds Trumpian. In a way, right? Like, this DOJ letter looks incredibly professional and looks like a normal DOJ letter. This is how the DOJ acts when they know they're in the right. They're just like very sensible and everything makes sense. This looks very Trumpian and looks like very polemical. As this court is aware, federal criminal proceedings are presumptively open to the public. The act ensures that this transparency is even more broad here. So now they're just going through the act. But of course, the act is not what's the issue. Therefore, by its terms, the act adds an obligation to the government and impliedly the courts. Impliedly. Well, dude, you knew this would come up. Come on. You knew this would come up. You're saying that they're saying by its terms, they intended the courts to enforce it. But you know that there's a presumption against implied causes of action, especially by the recent Supreme Court. To the court to ensure that all records are disclosed. Like the government, this court is obligated to abide by the act. Well, that's presuming the act does this. Impliedly give to the court an obligation to ensure that all records are disclosed. But that's not what the fucking act seems to say. And just like this with any other substantive or procedural law or rule, the court is obligated to enforce the act. I wish this would have worked with the with Section 3. Yo, what up, IPA? This obligation is no different than any other requirement applicable to criminal proceedings, none of which expressly state that the court has an obligation to enforce, but all of which the court must abide by and enforce. Yeah, but you could have included this, dude. If not, the act and any other law that touches upon a criminal proceeding would be rendered moot. No. Different laws can have different implications. Moreover, it should not be that when Article 1 branch mandates the Article 2 branch to take an express act, that the Article 3 branch must sit on its hands if the Article 2 branch fails to comply. It should not be. In virtue of what? In virtue of the law? Well, yeah, if you forgot the important part of your law that gives them the right to do that. The Real Caveman says the hopium take 4D chest take is that this is probably the best way to convince the outliers that Trump is covering up his own guilt. Maybe Massey hoping Trump isn't in there as number one schmedophile. Conservatives protect schmedophiles when Christian priests were implicated, etc., etc. Like, this is to me is just like word salad ramble, not convincing in the least. The congressman thus seek to raise the court's attention misbehavior by the government that has been occurring before this court, and to suggest that the court take urgent action to rectify. Ultimately, it is up to the court to decide whether it will act, but we urge it to. And let us file our brief. We properly appear as friends. Contrary to the government's assertion, the congressmen do not seek to intervene as parties, and so standing doctrine does not apply. I get it, but you are kind of raising new issues. You can't just say, I'm an amicus, and so therefore I can behave like a party. Ultimately, it's up to the courts if they want to consider the view of any interested person. The government's overwrought statements that this is a criminal case with two parties of the government and defendant Maxwell that is long over ring particularly hollow in this matter, where multiple third parties have already provided what amount to amicus curiae submissions. Okay, I'm just going to basically conclude right now. You guys can read this letter if you want. And if you want, I can retweet it so you can find it. But long story short, and I don't want to belabor it, I think that this is kind of like an optics PR play. I think that Massey and Kana are kind of wasting the court's time because I don't think they have a good claim here. And I think that they knew about it in advance to know that this would be the issue. And so the question is, what do we think of this play? Do we think that this is the deviousness that I imply? Do you think that they genuinely thought that they wrote a law that impliedly gave a cause of action? And do you think they're being straightforward in the court when they're saying that they want to be considered amicus curiae? Or do we think that they're not doing that and that they just are trying to keep it in the news and play optics? You decide. Okay, last things. How long have I been streaming? 247. Okay. Actually, I should save that. What should be the Democrats' midterm message? The Epstein mishandled or the ICE abused, or can we do both? I think you can do both. I think ICE right now is more prominent, but Epstein lingers. Did they write this or did they hire? No, this is from the law firm. I'm not saying this is a bad firm, by the way. I'm just saying this is like, I think, an optics play. You're kind of beyond caring. I might be there too. Keep it in the news. Keep it in. Leave it in Trump's court as definitely as possible. Going against a law you signed looks bad. Yeah, that's kind of what I predicted months ago that they would do with this law. And again, I think this is a losing argument from the reps. And I think the court has already signaled its hand with how they phrased the order. But it's funny. All right, folks, here's what I'm going to say. He isn't going against the law, though, bro. I think that he is. How would you have written it with a cause of action? Whom would you have said had the right? I would give a cause of action, I don't know, to like the victims of Epstein. Or to Congress. Like any particular branch of Congress or something. Or to any Congress member. Now there's questions about how much the law can influence Article 3 standing. I have to remember my case law on that. But yeah. Mark Kelly, pros and cons, Pisco. He says he's thinking about running for president. I think Kelly comes from Arizona, which is sick. I think he's a con is losing potentially the Arizona Senate seat, which he holds. He's a good candidate in Arizona, very competitive. The pro is he has very good like moderate energy. Which I think is good for optics. Even though I support more progressive candidates, I think moderate like optics. Another example of this I think is like Plattner, like regular dude energy. Regular dude, veteran energy, stuff like that. He wouldn't be my first choice though, if I'm being honest. Okay, homework for you guys. Number 1. Go watch me tomorrow at 9:30/1 p.m. with Connor Points and Richard Hanania, respectively. We're also going to release something, either my Pearly debate review at some point. Give that a like. And yeah, just stay cool. Join the Discord if you want. We love talking to conservatives. And thank you so much for the follows, the subs, the memberships. Means the world to me. But stay cool. I'm going to be out. I appreciate it. Oh, one other thing. So I saw XQC was streaming about the Renee Good shooting. I might have mentioned this earlier in the stream. But he's a idiot on it. And I just started chatting at him, being like, you don't know anything, you're stupid, you're 1 IQ. And they timed me out. But someone is trying to get us to chat. I think I mentioned this earlier in the stream. I don't think it's likely. And I don't think it will be a successful chat if it happens, but pray for me, because I think that it's important to send the right message and for people to understand that this is murder. And that he should be charged. So the bigger audience, the better on that front. And if not me, it should be someone else who's actually willing to debate the issues. Bit of a punk move to have such a strong opinion, but be unwilling to actually discuss it, in my opinion. But stay cool. I love you guys very much. You're the best.